My mother-in-law threw an envelope stuffed with $20,000 at me, my 3-month pregnant belly, a silent witness to her rage. "Get rid of it," she screamed. The moment my husband was declared dead in an accident, she wanted to erase his child and throw me onto the street. She was convinced I was using my unborn baby as a pawn, a bargaining chip for my husband's life insurance and this sprawling estate. But she didn't know. She didn't know that I had the old worn-out cell phone my supposedly dead husband had left behind. And she certainly didn't know that inside that phone was a recording of every sin she had ever committed. She thought my baby and I were just inconvenient obstacles to her vast fortune and ugly secrets. But now, it was time to return everything she'd given me. If you're intrigued by today's story, please give this a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. My name is Evelyn Reed. I'm a 9-year-old kindergarten teacher from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My husband was Ethan Cole, a construction site supervisor. We were married in May of 2025, and I followed him to New York City, moving into the house his family owned to start our new life. It was an immense brick house in Queens with cream-colored walls and heavy dark wood doors. The moment you stepped inside, a faint scent of lemon polish and old money always hung in the air, giving the impression of a home where nothing was ever lacking. When the Greyhound bus pulled into Port Authority and I dragged my rattling suitcase onto the curb, a wave of nausea from the long ride washed over me. Ethan was already there, waiting, a kind smile on his face, the sleeves of his plaid shirt rolled up. "Evelyn," he said, taking my bag with a playful grin. "Welcome to New York. The days of being the small-town princess are over. Though you're still my princess, of course." His words were a little cheesy, but they warmed my heart. It wasn't just the sweet talk. It was the profound relief of finally having someone to lean on in the middle of this strange, overwhelming city. After our long-distance relationship, he helped me into his pickup truck, and we headed for the house. The tangled highways and the deafening symphony of car horns were a shock to my system. I watched the dazzling, frantic city lights blur past the window, feeling impossibly small. "Don't worry," Ethan said, sensing my unease. "You'll get used to it in a few days. It's a crazy place, but there are good people here." Behind a black wrought iron gate was a small yard with a red brick walkway. As I stepped out of the truck, I saw my mother-in-law, Helen Cole, for the first time. She was a stout woman, her graying hair pulled into a neat, severe bun, dressed in a dark, comfortable-looking pantsuit. She looked me up and down from my sensible flats to the top of my head. Her gaze wasn't sharp, but it was meticulous, like an appraiser examining an antique. Then, a slow, thin smile spread across her face. "You're here," she said. "It was a long trip, you must be exhausted. Come in, get washed up, and we'll have dinner." I quickly bowed my head slightly. "Yes, Helen, thank you for having me." I had called her by her first name from the day we were engaged, but it still felt awkward. Still, I was her daughter-in-law now. I had to learn the rules of this house. Helen handed me a pair of house slippers, pointed me toward the guest bathroom, and then disappeared into the kitchen. She was a woman of impeccable order. The dish towels were hung on their designated hooks, the faucets gleamed, and the pots and pans were polished to a mirror shine. Seeing that, I actually felt a sense of relief. I'd heard so many horror stories about monstrous mothers-in-law. I figured someone this organized couldn't be all that bad. I still remember my first dinner at that house. On the heavy oak dining table sat a pot roast, mashed potatoes, and a perfect row of neatly arranged side dishes. The rich, savory aroma made my stomach rumble. Ethan placed a generous slice of roast on my plate. "Eat up," he said. "You must be starving after that long ride." Helen watched him, her voice a quiet but firm reprimand. "Mind your table manners, Ethan. Evelyn just arrived. We must all be mindful of our conduct." I quickly placed my fork and knife neatly on my plate and smiled. "Of course, Helen. Working with kindergartners, I've gotten into the habit of eating too quickly." "I'll be more careful." She nodded, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. Asterisk. Good girls get rewarded times, I thought to myself. Asterisk. It's going to be okay. Asterisk. But there was one small thing during that dinner that planted a seed of unease in my heart. Helen never asked about my life as a teacher, or about my parents back in Iowa. Instead, she asked, seemingly out of nowhere, "So, your parents own any property back in Iowa?" "A bit of land, maybe." I nearly choked on my potatoes. I glanced at Ethan, but he was pretending to be deeply absorbed in his green beans, clearly wanting me to answer. I had no choice but to be honest. "No, Helen. My family has a small vegetable garden, but that's about it. We live a simple life." "Ah," she said, a short clipped sound. And that was it. But her reaction was strange. It wasn't a warm "oh, I see," but a cold, detached acknowledgement, as if she were entering a fact into a mental ledger. After dinner, when I stood up to clear the plates, Ethan offered to help. Helen immediately stopped him. "A man's place is to worry about the world outside. Let your wife get used to her duties here." That phrase, "get used to her duties," sent a strange shiver down my spine. I'd done chores my whole life, but doing them in my own home was different from doing them in someone else's. Even though this was my husband's house, it felt like I was taking a test where no one had told me the questions. As I washed the dishes, Helen stood beside me, wiping down the counter. She didn't yell or criticize, but her quiet corrections were a constant pressure. "Be careful with that plate, it was my grandmother's. The pots dry better if you stand them up like this." Her voice was calm, but I felt as if a ruler was being held against my back. I remembered the old saying my grandma used to tell me, "When you're a guest in someone's house, watch your step." I vowed to be careful to not cause any trouble. That afternoon, Ethan took me up to our room on the second floor. It was clean and airy, with a large window overlooking the tree-lined street. He pulled a large body pillow from the closet and placed it on the bed. "You must be exhausted. Get some rest. If Mom says anything, I'll handle it." I looked at him, my eyes welling up. I felt lucky to have found a man who, at least in the small things, would stand between his wife and his mother. I sat on the bed and began to unpack. From my suitcase, I pulled out a small, hand-embroidered handkerchief my mom had secretly tucked in before I left. Holding it, I suddenly longed to hear my parents' voices, but I put it back. I couldn't show any weakness, not on my first day. In the evening, we heard a car pull up outside. A man in his 50s with a slight paunch and his shirt untucked walked in like he owned the place. Helen's face lit up. "Gus, you're here. Evelyn, this is my brother." I quickly stood up. "Hello, Uncle Gus." He let out a short laugh. "Well, look at the new bride. You look like a sweet one. But listen, being too sweet will only get you walked all over in this world." I didn't know how to respond, so I just gave an awkward smile. Gus sat down, and Helen poured him a cup of coffee. They seemed to be discussing something important. I caught snippets of words like paperwork, the property, and signatures. Then I heard Gus's voice a little too loud. "Helen, they're getting real impatient. You need to decide what you're going to do, and fast. If we keep stalling, they're going to show up at the front door and make a scene." My ears perked up. Asterisk. Who are they? What are they impatient about times? I glanced at Ethan. He was leaning against the doorframe, his face tense, but he was trying to look casual. Helen shot a look at her son, her voice low but sharp. "Keep your voice down. We have a guest." Gus just chuckled. "What's the big deal? She's family now." Part of the package. The word family should have felt warm, but coming from him it felt cold. The way he said it, it was like someone being added to a balance sheet, not welcomed into a home. That night in our room, I cautiously asked Ethan, "What were you and Uncle Gus talking about?" "Downstairs. I heard something about being impatient and someone coming to the house." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then he stroked my hair. "It's nothing, honey. Just some issues at a construction site. Don't worry about it. You just got here, you need to rest." With him saying that, I couldn't press any further. I knew men had their pride, but the feeling that he was hiding something pricked at me like a thorn. Late that night, Ethan got a call. He stepped out onto the small balcony, but I could hear his hushed, urgent voice. "Yes, I understand. I'll be at the site tomorrow. Yes, I'll take care of that amount. Just don't push them too hard." When he came back in, he saw my eyes were open. He forced a smile. "Go back to sleep, sweetie. Just a work call." I mumbled okay and pulled the covers up. Staring into the darkness, I remembered another one of my grandma's sayings. "You can know the bottom of a river, but you can never know the bottom of a person's heart." I didn't want to think the worst, but my intuition was screaming. That first dinner had delicious pot roast and savory gravy, but it felt like I had swallowed a fishbone. I just hugged my pillow tighter and told myself, "Times Evelyn, as long as your husband loves you, that's all that matters. You can figure out how to live with his mother over time." Asterisk. But maybe from the very first day I set foot in that house, I was standing before a door with invisible hinges, never knowing when it would silently swing shut behind me. After that first night, I fell into the routine of getting used to the ways of the house. It was a life where every step, every word, and every meal was silently observed and judged, all under the guise of gentle guidance. I found a job at a private preschool near the house. Every morning, I woke up before Ethan, I'd go down to the kitchen to make coffee for Helen only to find her already there, stirring a pot of oatmeal, her eyes fixed on me. "You're up early." "Yes. I'm used to the preschool schedule." She'd nod. "It's good to be used to things, but once you're used to something, you must do it properly to the very end. This house doesn't tolerate carelessness." She never raised her voice, but each word was like a brick being laid on a table. Over time, those bricks built a massive wall. I could only answer yes and do as I was told. Even when I was getting dressed for work, she would lean against my doorframe, her eyes scanning my simple dress. "It's fine that you're working, but be sure you're home in time for dinner. The women of this family don't wander around outside." I forced a smile. "Of course, Helen. I'll come straight home after school." At work, I was a whirlwind of activity. The children were like a flock of sparrows, feeding them, wiping their noses, teaching them songs. There was never a moment's rest. A colleague asked me, "Evelyn, how do you like being a New York City wife?" I gave a vague smile. "It's an adjustment." People probably thought I was living a dream, married to an engineer in a big house. But only the person living it knows the truth. Even honey can get sticky and suffocating. Around the end of May, my body started sending me strange signals. I'd wake up with a metallic taste in my mouth, and the smell of cooking oil would make me gag. One day at school, while lining the kids up, I suddenly felt so dizzy I had to grab a desk to steady myself. The school director looked at me with concern. "Evelyn, are you all right? Could it be—" "Good news," I froze, my heart pounding. We had planned it getting married in March and wanting a baby soon, but now that my body was confirming it, I felt like a child with a present she wasn't sure she should open. That afternoon I stopped at a pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. I hid it in my purse and walked home, feeling like I was carrying a huge secret. I waited until Helen went upstairs to her room for her afternoon nap, and Ethan was still at work, then slipped into the bathroom and locked the door. My hands trembled. When 2 pink lines appeared, I stared at them frozen for a few seconds, and then a smile broke out on my face. Tears started to stream down my cheeks. I was pregnant. I was really pregnant. I came out of the bathroom and paced the room, my hands protectively over my stomach. I wanted to shout with joy, but I had to swallow it down. In this house, even joy had to be expressed according to the rules. When Ethan came home that evening, he sniffed the air in the kitchen and smiled. "Something smells good. What's the special occasion?" I pulled him into our room, closed the door and whispered, "Honey, I have to tell you something." He looked at me, his expression serious. "What is it? Did Mom say something to you again?" I shook my head and handed him the test. He took it, blinking a few times as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Then he pulled me into a hug so tight I had to pat his back. "Ethan can't breathe." When he let go, his eyes were red. He knelt down and pressed his ear against my stomach, whispering as if he could hear the baby's voice. "Hey there, little one. It's your dad. I'm sorry I've been so busy. I'll start coming home earlier, I promise." Seeing him like that, my heart melted. I'd heard you can tell how much a man truly loves his wife by how he acts when she's pregnant. In that moment, Ethan was so genuine, I felt I could face anything with him by my side. We went downstairs to share the news. I felt like a student waiting for her exam results. Helen was on the sofa folding laundry. When Ethan said, "Mom, Evelyn's pregnant," her hands stopped moving. She looked at me for a long time, then a calculated smile appeared. "Well, that's good news. It's about time we heard the sound of a baby in this house." I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking she was happy like any other grandmother to be. But then she continued in her calm, measured voice. "Now that you're pregnant, you must be careful. Starting tomorrow, you will follow the diet I prepare for you. A smoothie with nuts in the morning, steamed fish for lunch, and absolutely no sour foods for dinner. And you are not to go anywhere alone." I just kept saying, "Yes, of course," like a subordinate receiving orders. She brought out a small notebook from her room where she had meticulously written down a schedule for me. What time to drink water, what time to sleep, even what time to take a walk. She handed it to me, her tone final. "This house runs on rules. Now that there's a grandchild on the way, we must be even more diligent." Ethan tried to intervene. "Mom, Evelyn still has to work at the preschool. Can't we be a little more flexible?" Helen shot him a look. "You're at a construction site all day. Who's going to look after my grandchild if I don't? This is all for the baby's sake." For the baby's sake. Hearing those words, I couldn't argue. The baby had become her justification, and I was silenced. I suddenly understood a very practical truth. Sometimes even an unborn child can become a soft rope used to tie you down. From that day on, it was as if Helen had been granted a new form of power. She controlled me, not with insults but with schedules. In the morning, she'd ask, What are they serving for lunch at the preschool today? In the evening, she'd check my bag. You didn't buy anything to eat on the way home, did you? I craved a cold can of soda, but I hesitated, afraid she'd say sugar was bad for the baby. Once I casually mentioned, Helen, I'm really craving some spicy gumbo the way my mom makes it back home. She put down her spoon, her brow furrowed. Spicy food raises the body's temperature. I don't know how you ate back in Iowa, but in this house you will do things my way. Back in Iowa. That single phrase made my face burn. It wasn't a harsh insult, but it was a precise jab at my most vulnerable spot, the fact that I was the small-town girl, the outsider in this house. Ethan, feeling sorry for me, tried to make up for it. In early June of 2025, he took me for my first prenatal checkup. The doctor confirmed I was 2 months pregnant, and that the baby was securely attached. Ethan beamed like a kid on Christmas morning. On the way home, he stopped at a bakery and bought me a slice of angel food cake. A pregnant woman should be treated like a queen, he said. But that sweetness didn't last long. Problems arose at a remote construction site he was overseeing, and he started leaving early and coming home late. He got more calls from unknown numbers, and sometimes he'd get up in the middle of dinner to take a call in the yard. His voice would be low and rushed, and he couldn't look me in the eye. I'm not a suspicious person, but pregnancy makes you sensitive. One night as I was folding a tiny onesie I had bought, I heard him on the balcony. Yes, I understand. But please don't call the house. My mother will lose it if she finds out. Yes, I'll find a way to get it. Just give me more time. I stood there holding the tiny piece of clothing, my hands suddenly cold. Asterisk. Get what? More time for what times? I remembered Uncle Gus's words. They're getting real impatient, and Helen's warning not to wander around alone. Suddenly, all the pieces started to connect. I walked out onto the balcony and stood behind him. He jumped, startled, and quickly ended the call. What are you doing out here? It's chilly. I kept my voice as gentle as I could, but my question was direct. Is something wrong? I heard you say you'd get it? He forced a laugh, but it was strained. It's nothing, honey. Just work stuff. You shouldn't be worrying about things like that in your condition. Just relax and take it easy. Worrying about things like that. The phrase was like a door slamming shut. I didn't want to embarrass him, so I just said okay and went back inside. That night, I lay on my side, my hand on my belly. I could feel this tiny life changing me, heart and soul. I loved this baby, but I was also afraid. The baby was my only joy, the one thing that gave me a real place in this house. But at the same time, I was beginning to realize that for my mother-in-law, while a grandchild was important, what was more important was who held the power in this family. The next morning, as I placed a glass of warm water on the table for her, Helen looked at me and said, almost as a warning, when you're pregnant, you should watch what you say. Don't try to know too much about the family's business. A woman who knows her place keeps the house peaceful. I froze. Before I could even ask, she had drawn a line in the sand. I was suddenly reminded of the simple law of gravity. Water always flows downward. A daughter-in-law, no matter how much she wanted to speak up, often had to swallow her words for the sake of peace. I sat down and looked at the breakfast she had prepared. A sense of foreboding settled over me like the distant rumble of thunder on a clear day, but I tried to reassure myself. Asterisk. I have my baby. I have to be strong. I have to make a place in this world for my child. Asterisk. Even if I had to walk slowly and carefully, I would keep walking. In early July of 2025, Ethan appeared with a backpack, a fluorescent safety vest, and a worn-out hard hat. He said he had to go to a construction site in a mountainous region of upstate New York. He'd be gone for about 2 weeks. It was supposed to be a routine trip, but the way he looked at me as he put on his boots was strange. It wasn't the look of a man going to work. It was the look of someone who wanted to say something but couldn't bring himself to. I walked him to the door. Listen to Mom while I'm gone, okay? Don't argue with her, and call me if anything happens. He bent down, placed a hand gently on my belly and whispered, You be good in there, little one. Helen stood behind us, her arms crossed, feigning concern. Be careful out there. The roads in the mountains are treacherous. You need to come back in one piece. Then she turned to me. And you stay put. A pregnant woman has no business wandering around. I mumbled yes, but my heart was uneasy. Some warnings sound like love, but they feel like the bars of an invisible cage. For the first 2 days, Ethan kept in touch. He'd send short video calls from the site or brief texts like, I'm okay. Did you eat? I'd write back long replies telling him about my day at school, about how much I was craving a warm glass of milk. He'd just send a smiling emoji, but that was enough for me. When you're pregnant, you feel vulnerable. Just knowing your husband is out there thinking of you feels like having a rock to lean on. On the third day, things started to feel wrong. That morning at school, as I was helping the kids wash their hands, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I quickly checked it, thinking it was Ethan, but there was nothing. I chided myself for being overly sensitive because of the pregnancy. But my lunchtime text, "Did you eat yet?" went unanswered. In the afternoon after work, I called him, but it just rang and rang before going to voicemail. When I got home, Helen was watching the news, her eyes glued to the screen. I gathered my courage and asked, "Helen, have you heard from Ethan today?" She glanced at me, her tone dismissive. "No. He's probably busy." She pursed her lips. A married woman should know that a man has important work to do out in the world. I didn't say another word. I went to the kitchen and heated up some leftovers, but I couldn't taste a thing. That night I tossed and turned in bed. The only sound was the hum of the fan, but my heart was beating irregularly. I opened my phone and reread our last messages. The empty space where the read receipt should have been filled me with a sudden dread. I finally fell asleep late, but was jolted awake by the sound of a chair scraping across the floor downstairs. I held my breath and listened, but it was quiet again. I told myself it was just Helen getting a glass of water. But a sense of foreboding made my stomach ache. Around 4:30 a.m., my phone shrieked, tearing through the silence. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding in my chest. It was an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice, hoarse and rushed, came through the line. "Is this Ethan Cole's wife? I'm from his company. Please listen calmly." My body went rigid. The words "listen calmly" are always the prelude to something terrible. Yes, what is it? Is something wrong with my husband? I could hear a cacophony of sounds in the background, muffled voices, footsteps, the wind. The man's voice dropped. The vehicle carrying the supervisor team. There was an accident on a mountain road. The police are at the scene now. You should prepare yourself. I couldn't hear the rest of his words. My ears felt like they were filled with water. I managed to choke out one question, my voice cracking. Is he alive?" There was a silence on the other end that lasted for a few seconds. That silence wasn't a clean cut. It was a slow, agonizing slice. Then he said, "I'm so sorry." I dropped the phone. My legs gave out, and I slid from the bed to the floor. I clung to the bedsheets with one hand and held my belly with the other, as if protecting the only thing I couldn't bear to lose. I tried to call my husband's name, but no sound came out. I scrambled to get up to run to the door, but as I reached the top of the stairs, the world went black. The last thing I heard was Helen's voice shouting as she threw open my door, "What's going on? Who was that on the phone at this hour?" And then I fainted. I woke up on a gurney in a hospital. The sharp smell of antiseptic, the blindingly bright fluorescent lights on the ceiling, the rumble of wheels, the sound of nurses calling out to each other. A dull, heavy ache pulsed in my lower abdomen, like someone was squeezing it with their hand. Helen was sitting beside me, holding my wrist. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. The moment I opened my eyes, as if on cue, she began to wail loud enough for the entire hallway to hear. "Oh, my son. What a cruel fate. How are we supposed to live now?" I whispered weakly. "Helen." "Ethan." She just shook her head, sobbing. "Don't talk. Don't say anything." A doctor on duty came over, asked a few questions, and checked my vitals. He said I was showing signs of a potential miscarriage due to stress, and that I needed absolute bed rest. Terrified, I grabbed his white coat. "Doctor, is my baby okay?" The doctor looked at me, his voice firm but not unkind. "Calm down. The fetus is still stable for now, but you must get absolute rest." The fetus is still stable. Hearing those words, I burst into tears. I sobbed, like someone who had just been pulled from a river, gasping for air. I wanted to scream in grief for my husband, but at the same time I wanted to hold my baby tight, overwhelmed with relief that they were still alive. The two emotions tore me in opposite directions. Just then, the sound of shuffling slippers and Uncle Gus's booming voice filled the hallway. "Helen, my God, I just heard the news." He appeared, his shirt wrinkled, his face a mask of feigned shock. He got straight to the point. "What did the police say? Did you get the paperwork from the company?" Lying there, I felt a chill run down my spine. The first thing he asked after hearing such horrific news wasn't, "Is Evelyn okay or is the baby safe?" but about paperwork. Helen wiped her tears and answered curtly. "They said they'd call back around noon. For now, I have to take care of her." Gus sighed, but his eyes were still darting around calculating. Yeah, you gotta take care of her. But Helen, you need to keep your head on straight. If we don't handle this now, we're gonna have a real headache later when people start coming around asking for their cut. I wanted to sit up and ask what cut he was talking about, but the doctor's words about bed rest echoed in my ears. I just stared at the white ceiling, feeling like I was at the bottom of a deep pit. The sounds of the emergency room, people coming and going, names being called over the intercom, the wail of an ambulance siren, all blended into a chaotic mess. But in the midst of that chaos, I could feel two heartbeats, mine and my baby's, faint but persistent. An old saying came to mind. Misfortunes never come singly. When you're happy, everything seems simple. But when tragedy strikes, it doesn't knock. It kicks the door down. I turned to face the wall, trying to swallow my sobs for the sake of the baby, but hot tears soaked the pillow. I had no idea how I was going to survive. All I knew for sure was that in one moment I had lost my anchor, and in the next I had been cast into a new world where every word spoken could be a knife. And I would have to learn how to catch those knives with my bare hands. The next morning I was discharged early on the condition that I remain on strict bed rest. You're at risk for a miscarriage, the doctor warned me repeatedly. Go home and do not cry or overexert yourself. I just nodded. Honestly, I was in a daze, my head filled with cotton. Helen put me in a taxi and took me home. In the car, she wasn't crying like she had been at the hospital. She sat up straight, her back rigid, her voice firm and decisive as she took one call after another. Yes, I need you to process that confirmation certificate. Yes, we'll hold the service at the house. Yes, send the documents over as soon as possible. I sat beside her, one hand on my belly, staring out the window. The city was still bustling, cars were moving, people were laughing and talking. It was as if my husband's death had no connection to this world at all. That feeling was an exquisite kind of pain, a grief that no one else could see. When we arrived, Uncle Gus was waiting on the porch, smoking a cigarette, his face grim. As the taxi stopped, he opened my door and helped me out, but it was a perfunctory gesture. His eyes were already scanning the house as if taking inventory. Evelyn, you're back. Go inside and rest. This must be so hard on you, especially in your condition. He said that then, immediately turned to Helen. Helen, the county clerk's office needs the death certificate and the accident report. If anything's missing, it'll slow down the whole process. The whole process. The phrase made my skin crawl. What process? He was talking about a funeral like it was a real estate transaction. Helen nodded. I know. You handle the outside business, I'll handle things here. With that, she helped me to the sofa, propping a cushion behind my back. Her voice was soft again. You have to protect that baby. That baby is Ethan's bloodline. The mention of his name made my throat tighten. I bit my lip to keep from crying, remembering the doctor's warning. I asked quietly, Helen, his body, is it coming home? She looked at me for a moment, then answered quickly. The company said it's not possible. The accident was too severe. They're handling it according to regulations. We just have to hold the service here. I didn't have the strength to ask more. There was a pit in my stomach, and I was afraid that asking more questions would only make it deeper. I sat there numbly, staring at the wedding photo on the wall, the two of us in our formal wear, smiling brightly. It felt like yesterday. By midday, the house began to fill with people. Neighbors, relatives, Helen's friends. A constant stream of condolences, the scraping of chairs, sighs, and sympathetic murmurs. Helen, dressed in black mourning clothes with a white ribbon in her hair, sat in the center of the living room like the pillar of the family. I was also in black, but she told me to sit in a corner, citing my pregnancy. One of the relatives, an aunt, took my hand and said loudly for everyone to hear, "Oh, you poor thing. A newlywed too. The heavens are so cruel." Another sighed. I hear she just moved here from the Midwest. Didn't even get to enjoy the good times. Their words were meant as sympathy, but they stung my pride. I didn't want to be seen as the poor girl from Iowa. I wanted to be seen as a wife who had lost her husband and was carrying his child, not an object to be pitied and assessed. In the afternoon, they set up a small memorial in the living room. The photo of my husband was a stern-looking headshot from his company ID. Helen herself arranged the flowers, lit the incense, and then pulled me to the front. "Pay your respects to your husband." I knelt. My forehead touched the cold floor. The scent of incense stung my nose and made my eyes water. From the yard, I could hear the low chanting of a minister they had called. The rhythmic sounds made me feel like an actor on a stage, but not the main character. As I bowed, I whispered in my heart, "Times Ethan, if you still love me and our baby, please watch over us." Asterisk. When I tried to stand, my legs buckled. In front of everyone, Helen pulled me into a hug and began to wail. "My dear, from now on it's just us. We have to rely on each other. Ethan has left both his mother and his wife behind." She sobbed loudly, and the other women in the room joined in. I was in her arms, my shoulders shaking, but all I could picture was her this morning, her voice firm and businesslike in the taxi. I didn't want to think ill of her, but it felt strangely performative, like an actor hitting her mark at the designated time. As night fell, the guests thinned out. I was exhausted from grief and the ache in my back. When I said I was going to go up and rest, Helen nodded. "Sleep on your left side, and no more crying." Up in the dark room, I could hear quiet voices from downstairs. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but Uncle Gus's voice carried. "Helen, you need to find the paperwork for Ethan's construction insurance policy. The sooner we file, the sooner the money comes in. We need to prepare for what's next." Helen's voice was low but firm. "Keep it down. His wife is upstairs." Gus scoffed. "She needs to know too. She's pregnant, which means we have to be even more careful with the numbers. It'll be a pain later if she starts making demands." Lying in bed, I clutched the sheets. Demands I couldn't comprehend what he was talking about. But I knew one thing for sure: while I was drowning in sorrow, they were already weighing me on a scale. Helen continued. "You just take care of the death certificate and the county paperwork tomorrow. I'll handle things in the house." "Right. You do that, Helen. This house is worth a fortune. We can't afford any screw-ups." Gus emphasized the word screw-ups. A chill ran down my spine. My husband was barely gone, and they were already talking about the value of the house. I remembered my grandma saying blood is thicker than water. Some people cherish blood because they love their children. But others cherish the property connected by that blood more than the people themselves. On the second day of the memorial, I went downstairs early. The incense was still burning. As I went to place a fresh glass of water in front of the photo, Helen was suddenly behind me. She looked at me coldly. "Your part is done. I'll handle the important matters." I looked up. "Yes, Helen. I just wanted to help." She stared directly into my eyes, a smile as thin as a leaf on her lips. "If you want to help, then take care of that baby in your belly. If anything happens to that child, you will have sinned against this house." The words sounded like concern, but the word sinned choked me. What sin? Was protecting my child a sin, or was my very existence the sin? Around noon, a man from Ethan's company came by with a folder of documents. He rattled off a list of technical terms I didn't understand: site reports, accident confirmations, compensation procedures. Helen listened, nodding with perfect clarity. Uncle Gus, like a man haggling at a market, casually questioned him on each point. I sat beside them, my hand on my belly, feeling dizzy. I wanted to stand up and scream. "That's my husband you're talking about." But I had no strength, and I was terrified that getting agitated would harm the baby. In the afternoon, during a moment when Helen was out of the room, a neighbor whispered to me, "You hang in there, dear. Good things come to those who are good. Mrs. Cole seems to care for you a great deal." I forced a smile. "Yes, I know. Asterisk. She cares, perhaps. Asterisk. But it was a conditional, warning, laden, controlling kind of care. A chain wrapped in velvet. It looked soft, but when it tightened, it could choke you silently. That second night, I sat before the memorial looking at my husband's photo. Under the yellow light, his face was so serious it was as if he was trying to tell me something. I clasped my hands, swallowed my tears, and promised myself I would protect the baby, and I would protect myself. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew that since the funeral began, I was no longer a protected daughter-in-law, but a pawn on a chessboard. Everyone was watching me, calculating, but no one asked, "Are you in pain?" The 49 sticks of incense had burned down to stubs, and the minister's chanting had faded. As the stream of visitors trickled to a stop, the house returned to its original state, large, clean, and silent as a closed box. I thought the quiet would be a relief, but the silence in this house wasn't peace. It was the calm before a storm, a stillness where the slightest touch could unleash a tidal wave. That morning I woke up early, planning to make a thin oatmeal for myself. The morning sickness was getting worse, and solid food was hard to keep down. But when I got to the kitchen, Helen was already sitting at the table. In front of her was a stack of documents and a small box of keys. Without looking at me, she said, "Sit down." I froze my hand on the back of a chair. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a command. Yes, Helen, did you need me? She turned a page, her voice as flat as if she were reading from a ledger. From now on, the rules of this house are changing. With Ethan gone, I am the only one in charge here. You are pregnant, so stay out of my way and don't do anything foolish. With Ethan gone. The words stabbed me. I swallowed my grief and said quietly, Yes, I understand. I wanted to help you. She looked up. For the first time, I saw that the look in her eyes was completely different from during the funeral. The redness was gone, and so was the sorrowful tone she used when she'd said it's just us now. It was a cold gaze that seemed to see right through me. Help with what? You've only been in this house for a few months. Let's be honest. You are an outsider here, and you are my responsibility to manage. I thought I had misheard. I stood there, frozen, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. She pulled the box of keys closer. The small times click times as she opened it made me jump. She dumped a jumble of keys onto the table, the gate key, the front door key, the garage key, even the key to Ethan's old motorcycle. From now on, I will hold all the keys. When you come home from work, you ring the bell. If you want to go somewhere, you ask me. I wanted to open my mouth to ask why, but my throat was tight. I wasn't a child to be managed like this. But I was pregnant, and I knew I was vulnerable. I tried to remain calm. Helen, my work schedule is fixed. It would be more convenient if I had a key. What if you're out when I get home? She cut me off. It doesn't need to be convenient. There are no what-ifs in this house. You just do your part. My part. The words made my ears ring. What was my part? The widow, the freeloader. She wasn't finished. She pushed another piece of paper toward me. It was a list of chores written in her neat script. Morning, sweep the yard. Midday, clean the stairs. Afternoon, do the laundry. Evening, clean the kitchen. And at the bottom in capital letters, no eating out. No takeout. I looked at the list, my head spinning. I worked a full day at the preschool, and now in my weakened state I was expected to do all this. I raised my head, my voice trembling. Helen, the doctor told me not to overdo it. I'm worried it will affect the baby. She smirked as if I'd said something ridiculous. The baby. Is that all you can say? Do you think being pregnant gives you a free pass to do whatever you want? This house doesn't support lazy people. My face flushed hot. Lazy. The word felt like a slap. I had worked as a teacher back home, helped my parents in their garden, and had never been called lazy in my life. I wanted to argue, but I remembered what she had said before. A woman who knows her place keeps the house peaceful. I didn't want to make things worse. I was afraid the stress would hurt the baby. I could only say quietly, I'm not being lazy. I just feel a bit weak. She tapped the table with her fingertips. The times, tap, tap, tap times sounded like nails being hammered into a coffin. Even if you're weak, you have to do it. Other women work in the fields right up until they give birth. You've just had it too easy here. My eyes stung. I turned my head, trying not to cry. The doctor's words echoed in my mind, but when my pride was attacked, the tears came anyway. You can lose money, you can lose possessions, but having your dignity trampled is the deepest pain of all. Just then, Uncle Gus walked in with a cup of coffee, chuckling. What's all the serious talk in here? Helen no longer bothered to keep up appearances in front of others as she had during the funeral. She said bluntly, I'm just explaining that from now on she lives by my rules. I have the keys and I need to know where she is at all times. Yeah. Gus nodded and turned to me. Listen, kid. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. I'm telling you this for your own good. You're pregnant now. The best thing you can do is listen to your elders. You don't want any nasty rumors starting, do you? Nasty rumors. There it was again. I was beginning to understand that in this house, rumors were more important than a pregnancy. To escape the conversation, I stood up to go to the kitchen, but Helen stopped me. Wait, we need to talk about this too. She went to a drawer by the front door and took out a bank book and a few envelopes, placing them on the table like evidence. She looked at me, her voice as cold as ice. I will be managing the condolence money from the funeral. It's for major expenses later. Don't even think about touching it. I froze. I hadn't even thought about the money. My mind was filled with Ethan and the baby, but she was preemptively accusing me of greed. I tried to explain. Helen, I wasn't thinking about it. I had no intention. She held up a hand. Good. Then we're clear. I'm just making sure. They say a husband's earnings belong to his wife, but my son is dead. From now on, there's nothing left to share in this house." Hearing that, I felt my heart clench. People use proverbs as lessons, but she used them as weapons to silence me. I looked her straight in the eye, and for the first time since becoming her daughter-in-law, I spoke clearly. "I am not asking you to share anything. I just want to be treated with respect in this house. I am Ethan's wife and I am carrying his child." Helen looked at me as if I were a rebellious child and scoffed. "Wife, eh? Jinx, who got her husband killed. A few months after getting married, you call yourself a wife." Ethan worked in construction for years without a scratch. Then he marries you, and a few months later, this happens. Other people might not say it, but I know what I see. I stood there paralyzed. There were no curse words, but every syllable she uttered was designed to drag me through the mud and make me the cause of this entire tragedy. I heard a small snapping sound inside my chest. It was the sound of the last thread of hope breaking. I turned and walked into the kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped a pot. I stood at the sink and turned on the faucet. The water gushed out, but it couldn't wash away my sorrow. I remembered the old saying, "Good things come to those who are good," but a bitter thought followed. Maybe I was being too good, and that's why people felt they could trample all over me. That afternoon, Helen served lunch as usual and said nothing more. Her silence was more terrifying than her scolding. It was like a final declaration that my place in this house had been decided. I ate, but I couldn't taste anything. A piece of fish felt lodged in my throat. When I came home from work early feeling unwell, I had to ring the doorbell. After a long wait, Helen opened the door, looked me up and down, and asked one single question. "Where have you been?" I felt suffocated. I had come from work, but I was being interrogated like a truant. "I got off early today," I replied. She didn't even grunt. In response, just turned her back and walked inside, leaving me standing on the doorstep. The heavy wooden door shut behind me with a thud. I suddenly felt like I wasn't living in my husband's home but in a boarding house. That night, I went to my room and instinctively reached for my phone to text Ethan, only to remember that there was no one to read my messages anymore. I held, my belly sank to the floor and tried to catch my breath. It felt as if the baby inside me was saying, "No matter what anyone says, we have to live." I wiped my tears and made a small, silent vow. Asterisk, Evelyn. You can endure, but you cannot let them crush you. Not for you, but for your child. You have to be strong. Asterisk. From the day Helen took the keys, the rhythm of my life changed completely. It no longer felt like coming home. It felt like checking into a dormitory. I had to report my departure and ask for permission to return late. As a preschool teacher, my hours weren't always predictable. If a child got sick and a parent was late, I had to stay and wait. But if I arrived home even 15 minutes late and rang the bell, the sound of Helen's dry cough from inside felt like a judgment. One afternoon as I walked into the yard, Helen's voice called out, "Come in, wash your hands, and get to the kitchen. The house is a mess today." I answered yes, like a robot. I changed my clothes and was about to sit down for a moment, but she placed a broom in front of me. "Sweep the yard. Look at all those leaves." I looked at the yard. There were barely any leaves, but she spoke as if I had turned it into a landfill. I took the broom and started sweeping. The afternoon wind blew dust into my eyes. As I bent over to scoop up the leaves, a sharp warning pain shot through my lower abdomen. I straightened up, rubbing my belly a few times, trying to catch my breath. Helen stood on the porch steps, not moving closer, just calling out, "Pregnancy is pregnancy, and work is work. Being pregnant doesn't mean you get to do nothing." Her words were like a thin blade, not drawing blood but slicing at my dignity. I clenched my jaw and kept working the doctor's words to avoid strenuous activity echoing in my head. But who was on my side? The only person who would have been was now just a photograph in the living room. I will never forget dinner that evening. Helen served a bowl of cold rice, a watery cabbage soup, and a single paper-thin fried egg. The smell alone was enough to trigger my morning sickness. I tried to force myself to eat, but the first bite made me gag. I put down my fork. "Helen, the morning sickness is really bad. Could I possibly have a little bit of plain oatmeal?" She looked at me, her eyes like ice. "In this house, we eat meals. Oatmeal is for sick people." "Are you trying to be sick?" I swallowed hard. "No, I'm worried about throwing up. It's not good for the baby," she scoffed. "Such a delicate baby. Other women eat spicy kimchi right through their pregnancies. Stop making a fuss." Uncle Gus, sitting beside her, slid the fried egg onto his own plate. If you can eat, eat. If you can't, don't. It's morning sickness, not an excuse to act like a princess. Princess. The word broke my heart. When I first arrived, Ethan had called me his princess as a joke. Now the word was being used to accuse me of being difficult. I couldn't take another bite. I stood up and rushed to the bathroom, heaving until tears streamed down my face. I held my belly, terrified for the baby. When I came out, Helen didn't ask if I was okay. She just said, "Clear the table. You've ruined my appetite." I stood there, frozen. I didn't know if I had thrown up from morning sickness or from pure misery. That night I lay in bed, my stomach cramping with hunger. I opened a drawer and pulled out a packet of crackers I had brought from school, secretly eating a few to quell the dizziness. I ate them like I was a thief. I had to laugh at myself, a wife and a daughter-in-law forced to eat in secret like a child. The next morning I woke up early and cooked a small pot of brown rice porridge, adding a little minced meat for nutrition. I figured if I made it myself I wouldn't have to ask for anything. But as I was about to eat, Helen came downstairs, saw the pot, and her face hardened. "What do you think you're doing?" "It's porridge. It's easier on my stomach because of the morning sickness." She slammed the lid down on the pot. "Get rid of it. I don't want the smell of that in my house. If you want to eat that, go out and buy it." I felt suffocated. She told me to go out, but she had forbidden me from leaving on my own. It was a dead end. I stood there silently, then said quietly, "Helen, I just want to be healthy enough to work and raise my child." She looked at me, her voice slow and deliberate. "If you want to raise your child, then you will listen to me. If you don't and something happens to that baby, who will take responsibility?" Responsibility. There it was again. The word was like a hammer to my head. I didn't dare defy her. I put the pot of porridge in the refrigerator. My heart felt like it had swallowed vinegar. At the preschool, the exhaustion was overwhelming. I'd get dizzy just from standing too long. One day, while carrying a tray of lunch plates, my hands started shaking so badly I almost spilled soup everywhere. The director pulled me aside. "Evelyn, you look so thin for someone who's pregnant." "Are you not eating well at home?" I forced a smile. "It's just bad morning sickness." She looked like she wanted to ask more, but she let it go. No one else knew my situation, and talking about it wouldn't solve anything. All I could do was endure. In mid-June, it was time for my regular checkup. I asked Helen for permission the day before. She glanced at her calendar and said, as if granting a great favor, "Fine, but you come straight home afterwards. No detours." The next day, I walked to the end of the block and called a car service. As I left the gate, I had the strange feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced back and saw a man in a baseball cap across the street pretending to be looking at his phone. I couldn't see his face clearly, but the way he was standing didn't look like someone waiting for a ride. I told myself I was being paranoid. But a few minutes after the car started moving, I saw a motorcycle in the rearview mirror, keeping a steady distance behind us. It was the same man in the baseball cap. My heart started to race. I leaned forward. "Driver, can you please take a different route? I think we're being followed." The driver looked at me in the mirror and nodded. "You got it, lady." "Hold on." He swerved down a few busy side streets and the motorcycle disappeared. I let out a breath and tried to calm myself, but the fear was now a permanent thorn in my side. At the doctor's office, the ultrasound showed the baby was fine, but the doctor said I was underweight and needed to eat more. "Are you under a lot of stress? Is everything okay at home?" he asked. I just shook my head, unable to tell him the truth. I blamed it on the morning sickness. The doctor gave me a list of instructions. Eat small, frequent meals, never skip a meal. The piece of paper felt like a distress signal with no one to send it to. When I got home, I rang the bell. Helen opened the door and her eyes went straight to the small bag of prenatal vitamins in my hand. "What did the doctor say?" He said, "I need to eat more. I'm underweight." She scowled. "That's because you're a picky eater. You refuse everything I make for you. You're making everyone's life difficult with this pregnancy." I wanted to scream that I had never refused anything, but I was too tired physically and emotionally. I went straight to the kitchen and started cleaning, as I was now required to do. As I was wiping down the counters, I heard Helen talking to Uncle Gus in the living room, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "She's so weak. If something happens to that baby, it's our family that will get a bad name." Gus answered nonchalantly. "So what if we do, Helen? You need to focus on getting the house and the paperwork sorted out first." There are ways to handle a daughter-in-law later. I froze. The dishcloth slipped from my hand and fell to the floor. Handle a daughter-in-law. What did that mean? I didn't want to think about it, but my mind filled with terrifying possibilities. That night, I curled up in bed. I'd had nothing but a bowl of rice and a few crackers all day. I was hungry, but I couldn't swallow anything. I placed a hand on my belly and whispered to the baby as if comforting myself. Hang in there, little one. Mommy will too. People say a baby brings fortune, but all I want is for you to give me the strength to live. As I said it, a tear rolled down my cheek. Not because I was weak, but because I was starting to feel completely cornered. Inside the house, I had to be the demure woman who knew her place. Outside, I was being watched. I was trapped between two walls, and the more I struggled, the deeper the wounds became. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was a single line. Asterisk. Don't trust anyone in that house. Asterisk. I stared at the screen, a cold dread washing over me. The text message from the unknown number kept me awake all night. Asterisk. Don't trust anyone in that house. Asterisk. I read it over and over, my palms cold and clammy. I texted back, "Who is this? Why are you telling me this?" But the message only showed a delivered receipt. No reply came. The silence felt like someone breathing cold air on the back of my neck. I was terrified of who they were and angry that if they knew my situation, they wouldn't just tell me the truth, instead of leaving me with a cryptic warning. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes. I stood in front of the mirror, telling myself to stay calm. Asterisk. The doctor said getting agitated is bad for the baby. Asterisk. As I went downstairs, I heard Helen on the phone in the living room, her voice sharper than usual. "What do you people want? I told you. I'm handling it. Don't you dare come to my house." She slammed the phone down and turned to me, her gaze like a knife. "Come here and sit down. We need to talk." I sat, my heart pounding. I didn't know if it was from fear or from the hunger that had been gnawing at me since last night. Helen placed a thick envelope and a folded piece of paper on the table in front of me. She didn't beat around the bush. "Let's be frank. Your being here is an inconvenience. This family is going through a difficult time, and you in your condition are no help at all. You're just making things harder for me." I swallowed hard. "Helen, I go to work every day, I do the chores. All I asked was for something simple to eat." She held up a hand. "Don't try to take credit. You work for yourself, not because this house needs your pathetic salary." The words made my face burn. I had never taken a dime from her. I worked because I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet, but arguing now would be like pouring gasoline on a fire. I lowered my voice. "What is it you want to say? Please just tell me." She pushed the paper toward me. It was a handwritten address of a clinic and an appointment time. I looked at it, and my heart stopped. "Helen, what is this?" She looked me straight in the eye. "It's a clinic. Take this envelope and go get that thing in your belly taken care of." My ears were ringing. I thought I had misheard. "Helen, what did you just say? This is Ethan's baby. This is your grandchild." She let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Grandchild. A grandchild that will be a ball and chain around my neck. Ethan is gone. Did you really think having this baby would guarantee you a place in this house?" I shot up from my chair, my hands instinctively flying to my stomach. "No, I never thought that. I just want to have my baby. I'm Ethan's wife. I can't do that." She slammed her hand on the table. "Sit down," I trembled, but remained standing. She continued, each word a calculated blow to my dignity. "You're still young. Who's going to want you with some fatherless kid? What will people say about this family? I'm doing this for your own good." I couldn't breathe. Asterisk. For my good, or for yours times. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't you get defiant with me. You've been eating and sleeping under my roof for months. Now you will listen to me. Being stubborn will only hurt you. Understand?" I looked at the envelope. My hands were shaking violently. In the corner, she had written the amount $20,000. It was a lot of money to me, but it was sitting on the table as the price of a life. My voice was raw and cracked. "Helen, please. I'll do anything. I'll even move out and live on my own. Please, just let me keep my baby." She let out a chilling laugh. "Live on your own, on what your preschool teacher's salary. How long do you think you'd last before the people we owe money to find you? What if they hurt you and that baby? Who's going to take responsibility?" Then I froze. Asterisk. The people we owe money to. Asterisk. So the feeling of being watched wasn't my imagination. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. She wasn't worried about me. She was using my fear to threaten me. Just then, Uncle Gus walked in, keys dangling from his hand. He glanced at me, then at the envelope, his voice casual but cruel. Helen's right. That baby will just be another problem. If you knew what was good for you, you'd do what she says. Don't get a reputation for being greedy. I turned to him, my eyes burning. Uncle Gus, how can you say that? This is Ethan's child. He shrugged. Bloodlines only matter when the situation allows for it. You have no idea what this family is dealing with. The room felt like it was tilting. I couldn't tell if I was standing or falling. I could feel the baby tense up inside me. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and said clearly, I won't do it. You can kick me out, but I will never do it. Helen looked at me like I was a stubborn child. She slowly stood up and went to the stairs. I thought she was giving up, but a few minutes later she came back down, dragging my suitcase behind her, the same one I had arrived with. She threw it on the floor with a loud thud. If you won't do it, then get out. I was paralyzed. All my senses felt numb. She pointed to the door. This is the Cole family home. Don't think for a second that being pregnant gives you the right to stay here. Leave now while I'm asking nicely. Otherwise, you'll be responsible for what happens next. I stared at the suitcase on the floor. The zipper had burst open, and a few of my clothes had spilled out, my dignity, spilling out with them in front of these two people. I made one last plea, my voice a hoarse whisper. Helen, I don't want your money. Just a place to have my baby. A place where I can work and raise him. Helen cut me off. If you want to raise it, go back to Iowa and do it there. Don't be an eyesore here. From now on, I am the only master of this house. Gus walked over, yanked open the front door, and dragged my suitcase into the yard as if it were a bag of trash. Just leave quietly, he said. Don't make a scene and embarrass yourself. I followed him out my legs, feeling like they didn't belong to me. The midday New York sun beat down on my face. I stood in the middle of the yard, holding my belly, staring at the black iron gate I had walked through with so much hope just a few months ago. Helen didn't come outside. She just threw the envelope of money and the slip of paper with the address at my feet. I've shown you the way. The rest is up to you. I bent down and picked up the paper, my hand shaking so badly it fluttered. I picked up the envelope not because I wanted the money, but because I knew that once I walked out that gate, all I had in the world was my phone and whatever was left of my last paycheck. I looked up at her, biting my lip hard. Could I still call her Helen? The word was a stone in my throat. Finally, I managed one last sentence, my voice barely a whisper. I'm not giving up my baby. She didn't answer. The heavy wooden door swung shut slowly but decisively, like the lid of a coffin closing on a love that had died long before my husband had. I dragged my suitcase to the street. The rattling of the wheels on the sidewalk sounded like my own heart breaking. I watched the people passing by, all busy, all in a hurry. No one knew that a pregnant woman had just been thrown out of her home. I thought of my parents back in Iowa. How would the neighbors look at me if I returned pregnant, and without a husband I could already hear my mother's sighs, feel my father's silence, a silence that would be heavier than any scolding. An old saying my grandma used to say came to mind, and my throat felt raw. The life of a daughter-in-law is a hard one. But I placed a hand on my belly and took a deep breath. I may have been thrown out of a house, but I would not throw my child out of my life. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and shoved the slip of paper into my pocket. Not to follow her instructions, but to remember how I had been treated. I started walking, the sun beating down on me, telling myself, over and over times, Evelyn, as long as you can stand, your child has a mother. Asterisk, I hadn't walked more than a few blocks before my legs gave out. The midday sun felt like a furnace. I had nowhere to go and couldn't bring myself to call my parents. The thought of my mother's disappointed sighs and my father's heavy silence was more terrifying than anything. I ducked into a small bodega, bought a bottle of water, and huddled under its awning. My hand never left my belly as I tried to catch my breath. The envelope with $20,000 was in my pocket. It felt like a life raft, but one covered in mud. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't afford to throw it away. I had to survive. I had to keep my baby alive. I took out my phone and searched for the nearest women's health clinic, deliberately avoiding the address Helen had given me. I wasn't foolish enough to walk into a trap they had set. I chose a small, unassuming clinic tucked away on a side street, a place that wasn't too flashy or busy. I called a car carefully, asking the driver to circle the block once before dropping me off just in case. All I wanted was to hear my baby's heartbeat, to know they were okay, to find the courage to move forward. The clinic was at the end of a quiet street. The glass door read, Women's Health Ultrasounds Pregnancy Counseling. Inside, the faint smell of antiseptic filled the air. The receptionist asked for my name and how far along I was. Evelyn Reed, I answered, my voice still trembling. Almost 3 months. She gave me a quick glance and handed me some forms. In the waiting room, there were a few other pregnant women, their husbands beside them, holding bags of snacks and drinks. A wave of self-pity washed over me. I felt like an alien. Asterisk, their husbands are here alive. Asterisk, the thought stung, and I bit my lip to keep from crying. A few minutes later, the door to an office opened, and a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and glasses came out. He was wearing a crisp white coat. Looking at his list, he called out Evelyn Reed. His voice was low and warm, the kind of voice that inspires trust. I went in my hand, still instinctively cupping my belly. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. Are you feeling unwell? I nodded. The morning sickness has been bad, and I've just had a shock. He looked at me intently, his gaze kind. You can be honest with me. No one will judge you here. For some reason, hearing that made my throat tighten. The world loves to judge, especially a pregnant woman who shows up at a clinic alone. I didn't tell him everything, just a vague. I'm having some family problems. He didn't press. He just asked me to lie down on the examination table for an ultrasound. As I lay there staring at the white ceiling, I clutched the hem of my shirt. The cold gel on my skin made me flinch. The doctor watched the monitor adjusting the probe. Then, the room went quiet. I panicked. Doctor, is something wrong with the baby? He pressed a small button. A rhythmic times thump 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 times filled the room as clear and strong as a drum. I froze. A heartbeat. My baby's heartbeat. Tears streamed down my face, rolling down my temples and into my hair. The doctor handed me a tissue, his voice still calm. The fetus is stable. It's good news, you can relax. I sobbed. Thank you, doctor. Thank you. I was so scared. So scared I had failed to protect my baby. He looked at me for a long moment. You can protect your baby, but you have to protect yourself too. Right now, you're malnourished, sleep-deprived, and under extreme stress. It's a dangerous combination. I wiped my tears and tried to breathe. He continued the scan and then said something that pierced my heart with both joy and sorrow. Looks like you might be having a boy. A son. I instinctively placed my hand on my belly, feeling like I was cradling a tiny piece of sunshine. If only Ethan were alive, he would have grinned until his eyes were red. The doctor jotted something down in my chart, then looked up and asked as if making small talk. How long did you and your husband know each other before you got married? I hesitated. A little over a year. He nodded. And were there any objections from either family? I was confused. Why was he asking these things? No objections. It's just, my family is from a small town in the Midwest, and his is from here. There was a bit of a difference. He asked another question. And your husband passed away recently. My body tensed. I didn't want to think about it, but his voice was so calm that I found myself answering. Yes, early July. He murmured a quiet "I see," then stood up and poured me a glass of warm water. You must be feeling dizzy. Drink this. I took the glass, feeling both grateful and wary. He was being too kind. It didn't feel like a random encounter. I looked at him, hesitating. Doctor, the bill. He waved his hand. We can worry about that later. For now, just sit and rest. There's something I need to tell you. I sat back down, my mind racing. He pulled his chair closer and lowered his voice. Don't go to that other clinic. The one they told you to go to. Do you understand? I was stunned. How did you know? He didn't answer directly. In my line of work, you see a lot of things. I can tell you're in a very difficult situation. But listen to me. Do not give up on this child. His words were like a life preserver thrown at the perfect moment. I nodded frantically. I won't. I swear I won't. He looked at me for a moment, then said slowly, I need you to come with me and meet someone. After you meet him, you'll understand why you've been treated this way. But you must remain calm. You cannot cause a scene. I swallowed hard. "Who is it?" He answered simply, "Someone who knows your husband and your in-laws very well." A chill ran down my spine. The strange text message flashed in my mind. Asterisk. Don't trust anyone in that house. Asterisk. I didn't know if I could trust this doctor, but I didn't have many other options. It felt as if my unborn baby was guiding me, telling me to take this path. "Doctor," I said, "I'm scared." He looked me straight in the eye, his voice full of conviction. "You have to be. You have to move forward. Joy is meant to be shared, and sorrow is meant to be carried together. But right now you are carrying everything alone. And that is not right." I was silent. His words hit the very core of my loneliness. I clutched my purse strap and gave a tiny, hesitant nod. Asterisk. Dear viewers, if this story has touched you so far, please give it a like to support our channel. And if you were in my shoes, pregnant and thrown onto the street, would you endure it quietly, or would you fight back and seek justice? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. The story is just beginning. A shocking twist is about to turn everything upside down. What was the real truth about the husband I thought I knew times? The doctor led me out a back door, avoiding the people in the lobby. He called a cab and even asked the driver to keep the AC on low for the pregnant passenger. His thoughtfulness only made me more confused. But I didn't have the energy to question everything. I just memorized the license plate number just in case. The taxi stopped in front of a small cafe on a quiet street. "Wait here in that corner booth," the doctor said, helping me out. "I'll go get him." I sat there, cupping a glass of warm water, staring out the window. My heart was pounding even harder than when I'd heard the baby's heartbeat. I told myself not to get my hopes up. The bigger the hope, the bigger the disappointment. But a small voice kept knocking at the back of my mind. Asterisk. What if times? The cafe door opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, with a sun-weathered look like someone used to the dust of a construction site. He scanned the room, and his eyes landed on me. He stopped short. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. The doctor led him to my table. "This is Evelyn Reed," he said. "And this is Daniel." The name hit me like a physical blow. Daniel. Ethan's best friend. The one my husband had always talked about. Daniel's the most loyal guy I know. Daniel sat across from me, his hands clasped on the table. His voice was hoarse. "Evelyn, I am so sorry. I'm so late." I swallowed, trying to keep my composure. "What do you know about my husband? Please just tell me. I can handle it." Daniel looked down for a long time, then finally raised his head. His eyes held the weight of a forbidden truth. He spoke slowly, each word dropping onto the table like a stone. "Evelyn, you need to listen to me very carefully. Ethan. He might not be dead. Ethan. He might not be dead." When those words fell onto the table, they didn't explode like a bomb. Instead, they sent a numbing shock that traveled from my fingertips all the way up my spine. I gripped the warm water glass, my knuckles white. I didn't scream or cry. When you're in that much shock, the first thing that happens isn't tears. It's a dry, burning thirst. "What did you just say?" My voice came out as a cracked whisper. "Daniel, please don't joke like that." Daniel lowered his head, his shoulders slumped as if he were carrying a physical weight. In a voice that was quiet but clear, he said, "I'm not joking. I would rather you slap me across the face than lie to you right now. But you have to stay calm. This wasn't just an accident." I looked over at the doctor, whose name I now knew was Sterling. He sat there calmly, as if he had expected my reaction. He only added one thing: "Let's hear him out." I turned back to Daniel. If Ethan was alive, then what was that funeral, that memorial, the hours I spent kneeling and crying? What was all of that? Daniel bit his lip, his eyes red. "It was all a setup. And before you ask, I don't know everything. Ethan was very careful to hide the details." A laugh escaped my lips, but it sounded like a sob. "Careful. So careful that I got thrown out of my own home and threatened to have an abortion. That's what you call careful." Daniel held up his hands, pleading. "Evelyn, I understand why you're angry, but if you listen, you'll see that even Ethan didn't expect things to go this far." He pulled a folded stack of papers from his pocket and laid them on the table. They weren't deeds or titles, but copies of contracts and construction invoices. He pointed to a line item, his voice a mixture of anger and helplessness. Ethan got caught in a contract scam. A subcontractor inflated the cost of materials and then blamed the supervisory team. When it came time for the final inspection, they changed their story, claimed the materials were substandard, and hit him with breach of contract fines and damages. The total ballooned to over $3.6 million. I froze. 3.6 million. It was a number from another universe, a number that had nothing to do with my life as a kindergarten teacher. But now, that number was a stark reality sitting on the coffee table in front of me. How could Ethan possibly pay that? I whispered, my mouth dry. Daniel shook his head. He couldn't. He even went to loan sharks trying to pay off a portion of it to buy time so he could countersue, but they wouldn't give him time. They threatened to show up at the house to make his life a public hell unless he paid up immediately. Helen's sharp-toned phone calls, the feeling of being watched, it all came rushing back. The scattered pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that made my blood run cold. So the accident? I asked, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs. Was the accident real? Daniel swallowed hard. It wasn't a normal accident. Nothing about it made sense from the beginning. First, the accident report was processed way too quickly. Second, I heard from a guy on the inside that someone high up pushed all the paperwork through. Who could do that? And how? And there were rumors. Rumors that an unidentified body was used to close the case. I felt sick. I covered my mouth, fighting back a wave of nausea. I didn't want to believe it, but, like the old saying goes, where there's smoke, there's fire. I looked Daniel straight in the eye. So the person at the funeral, that wasn't my husband. Daniel was silent for a long time. His silence was a resounding confirmation. Then he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. This time I let out a pained laugh. Then who did I bow to? Who was I crying for? Whose memorial was I attending? I gripped the edge of the table. Where is Ethan? Does he know I was kicked out? Daniel glanced at Dr. Sterling, as if seeking permission. The doctor just sat there quiet as a statue and gave a slight nod. Daniel lowered his voice. Evelyn, Ethan made me promise. He said I was only to tell you if you were truly at a dead end. He was terrified the shock would harm the baby. And he believed his mother would protect you. My head snapped up. His mother? You mean Helen? Daniel looked down, his voice choked with emotion. Yes. I lost all pretense of politeness. She knew all of this, and she still told me to get an abortion, and threw me onto the street. Daniel didn't look at me, but he spoke each word clearly. She knew about the debt, and she knew that Ethan needed to disappear for a while. And she is at least partly responsible for making everything this much worse. My ears were ringing. I pictured Helen at the funeral holding me crying. It's just us now. The words now felt like lines from a play. I wanted to jump up, run to that house, and demand the truth. But my hand went to my belly, and I knew I couldn't. The baby was too fragile. I had to stay seated. Daniel, I said, my voice low but trembling. What did she want? What was the point of all this? He sighed deeply. From what I can piece together, she was terrified the creditors would make a scene and she'd lose her assets. And she never liked the idea of you, the girl from Iowa. She saw the baby as a liability. I think she figured if you were gone, it would be easier to clean up the mess. I closed my eyes. Clean up. So that's what my baby and I were. A mess to be cleaned up. I opened my eyes and looked at him, a last shred of hope in my voice. But Ethan, he didn't really intend to abandon us, did he? Daniel shook his head fiercely. No. Never. Ethan loves you, Evelyn. He was just cornered. He trusted his mother. You know how some people say a kind mother raises a dutiful son? Well, in some families, kindness is just a decoration you hang on the front door. I couldn't speak. A part of my heart had shattered, and another part had hardened into stone. I was no longer the naive girl who had arrived in New York City full of hope. Daniel pulled his chair closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Evelyn, listen to me carefully now. You can't go back to that house. Don't call them. Don't confront them. Right now you are a pregnant, vulnerable woman. They want you to be quiet. The more noise you make, the more dangerous it becomes for you. I scoffed. I was quiet, and they threw me on the street. He nodded, a pained expression on his face. I know. That's why I'm giving you this. He reached into his bag and pulled out an old beat-up smartphone. The screen was cracked and the corners were scuffed. He placed it in my hand like it was a sacred object. This is Ethan's phone, the one he hid. I've been holding on to it for him. There's something on here you need to hear. I stared at the phone. It was like looking at the hand of a ghost. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, asking for a passcode. I don't know the password, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Daniel looked at me, his eyes full of guilt. He told me, If you couldn't open it, to try a number that was important to you and the baby. My hand went to my belly, and I took a deep breath. A single date, one I had been reciting to myself for weeks, flashed in my mind. The baby's due date, the one the clinic had given me. With a trembling hand, I typed in the numbers, my heart pounding. I was afraid it would be wrong, afraid of hoping and being disappointed again. The screen unlocked. I froze, tears streaming down my face before I could even think to wipe them away. They weren't tears of sadness. In that moment, it was as if Ethan was standing right beside me, whispering, "I'm still thinking of you." The home screen was simple. A few old app icons, some photos from construction sites, a couple of memo files, and a single folder labeled simply House. My finger hovered over it, afraid of what I might find, afraid it would change my life forever. I took a breath, opened the folder, and stared at the glowing screen in my palm like it was a tiny lantern in the dark. The phone's screen glowed dimly in my hand. Inside the House folder was a list of audio files named simply by date. Some were labeled evening, some morning, others just a string of numbers. I looked at Daniel, my throat dry. "What are these?" Ethan had a habit, Daniel said quietly. Whenever he had an important conversation or an argument, he'd record it just to have a record. He's always been a careful person. I bit my lip. A careful person who walked right into a trap. I put in the earbuds Daniel handed me and pressed play on the first file. After a bit of static, I heard Ethan's voice, tired, but trying to stay calm. Asterisk. "Ethan, Mom, I told you. I just need to lay low for a few months, get this sorted out, and I'll be back. Evelyn's pregnant. I can't just abandon her." Asterisk. Then came Helen's voice. In the recording, it was different from how she spoke to me, lower, sharper, stripped of its usual mask of polite society. Asterisk Helen. "Don't be a fool. If you're going to disappear, you do it clean. If you leave her here, those loan sharks will come sniffing around and drag this whole family through the mud." Asterisk. Asterisk. "Ethan, I already told them to back off. To not make a scene. Evelyn doesn't know anything. She's a good person." Asterisk. Helen let out a cold laugh. Asterisk Helen. "That's why she's easy to handle. If you care about her so much, then take her with you. Don't you dare let her plant roots in this house." Asterisk. Easy to handle. The words made my skin crawl. This was the same woman who had held me at the funeral, crying about how we had to rely on each other. But in private, she saw me as an object, something to be handled. Across the table, Daniel couldn't bring himself to look at me. I pressed play on another file. This time, Uncle Gus's booming voice joined in. Asterisk Gus, Helen's right. The paperwork for this house has to be clean. It'll be a nightmare if the daughter-in-law has her hands on anything. What are you going to do later when she shows up with a baby in her arms, crying and begging? If you get soft, then we lose everything. Asterisk, asterisk, Helen. When have you ever seen me get soft? I only act weak in front of other people. In this house, I make the decisions. Asterisk. I had to pull the earbuds out to breathe. The air in the cafe suddenly felt thick and heavy. I put a hand on my belly. It felt like the baby was curling into a tight ball. "Evelyn, drink some water," Daniel said urgently. "You look pale." "I'm fine." I looked him straight in the eye. "Knowing all this, why didn't you tell me sooner?" His voice was choked with guilt. "Ethan made me swear. He said if you found out too early, you'd confront his mother, and that would put you in danger. He was so scared. Scared the shock would hurt the baby." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. So he was worried I'd be shocked, but not that his own mother would throw me on the street. Daniel buried his face in his hands. I'm not defending him. I was stuck in the middle and it was hell. Helen is not someone you cross lightly, and with those people watching you, I didn't know what to do. Those people watching me. The phrase sent another chill down my spine, so it wasn't my imagination. With a trembling hand, I played another file. This one didn't start with Ethan's voice. I heard a door close, footsteps, then Helen's voice cold and commanding. Asterisk Helen. Listen to me. Cut off all contact and just disappear. I'll tell the girl you're dead. She'll cry for a few days and then get over it. She's pregnant. She'll be too busy worrying about herself. Asterisk Ethan's voice rose in anger. Asterisk Ethan. Mom, what are you saying? Don't even talk like that. Asterisk. Asterisk Helen. Don't talk like that. You're the one drowning in debt, telling me what to do. Let's be honest, that poor girl from Iowa is no help to you. When she has that baby, it'll be a weight dragging you down for the rest of your life. You'll never be able to get back on your feet. Asterisk. And ringing filled my ears. Asterisk. Get back on your feet. Asterisk. So that was it. In her mind, she already had a comeback story planned for her son, and my child and I were just obstacles in the way. I took off the earbuds, placed them on the table, and looked directly at Dr. Sterling. He was still watching me with that unnervingly calm expression. "Doctor," I said, "how did you know to bring me to Daniel?" He answered slowly. "I was asked to. I was just doing my part to make sure you didn't walk into a dangerous situation." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Before I could ask more, Daniel placed his hands on the table, speaking quickly as if afraid I'd get lost in suspicion and lose my focus. "Evelyn, the important thing is that you know the truth now. You can't go back to that house. Don't call them, don't scream at them. They're waiting for you to do that. It will give them an excuse." I looked at him. An excuse for what? Daniel sighed heavily. An excuse to say you're mentally unstable. An excuse to say you're making things up. An excuse to get you out of the picture for good. We have to be smart. We have to use the evidence. I looked down at the phone. One of the Clastas Hall 4 times test a phone. Why I have 10 subside. We can tromper on the daughters. On of the daughter minuten. An excuse to get you out of the picture. We have to be smart plays the picture. There were other files in the house folder, photos of documents, screenshots of text messages. I opened one. It was a text exchange between Helen and Gus. I didn't need to read the whole thing. One sentence was enough to make my blood run cold. Asterisk. Gus, I know a lawyer. If she leaves voluntarily, it's a clean break. Asterisk. I exhaled, a weight pressing down on my chest. Voluntarily. Of course. They were setting it up so it would look like I had left on my own, disappeared of my own free will. If something had happened to me, they would have just said they didn't know where I went. My mom's old advice echoed in my head. If you help others, heaven will help you. I had always believed that. But now I had learned a different lesson. Helping isn't enough. You have to protect yourself. I lifted my head, my voice hoarse but firm. Daniel, I have nothing left to lose but my baby. Tell me exactly what I need to do. As if he'd been waiting for those words, he said immediately. First, we need to find you a safe place to stay. Second, you need to change your number for a while so they can't find you. Third, you need to keep this phone safe and back up all the data. And fourth, you need to act weak. Act like you're scared and you're going to do exactly what they want. I frowned. Act weak. He nodded. Call Helen. Tell her you're going to go somewhere quiet to take care of yourself. Tell her you won't be a burden anymore. Do not under any circumstances mention the recordings. The more they think you've given up, the more careless they'll become. A bitter smile crossed my lips. So, in this world, even being gentle could be a strategy. Where will I stay? I asked. I know a woman who rents out rooms. Her name's Brenda. She's a tough lady, runs a market stall, but she's got a good heart. It's a safe, quiet place. You can stay there for a while, and we can plan our next move. I looked out the window. The city was still moving, people working, eating, shopping, but in just a few days I had gone from the wife of a respected engineer to a woman dragging a suitcase on the street. If it weren't for the baby, I would have broken. But because of the baby, I couldn't. I picked up the old phone and put it deep inside my bag. I turned to Dr. Sterling. Doctor, thank you for showing me the baby's heartbeat and for bringing me here. But from now on, I'll handle things myself. I don't want to be indebted to anyone else. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. A wise decision. A debt can sometimes follow you for a lifetime. But don't worry. I want nothing from you. His words sounded kind, but they put me on high alert. Sometimes the most expensive thing in the world is something that's free. I stood up. Daniel quickly grabbed my suitcase. Take it easy, he said. Don't overdo it. I nodded and walked out of the cafe. The city air smelled of exhaust fumes and sunlight. For the first time since being thrown out of that house, I didn't feel completely alone. Not because someone was helping me, but because I finally knew exactly who I was fighting against. That evening, I followed Daniel to Brenda's place, a small apartment building in a different borough. Brenda looked me up and down, saw my pale face and pregnant belly, and clicked her tongue. Lord, child, what happened to you? Well, get inside. We all gotta help each other out in this world. I'm not rich, but I'm not gonna leave a pregnant girl on the street. Her simple gruff kindness made my eyes well up. I thanked her, my head bowed. My heart began to beat at a normal rhythm. I finally had a roof over my head. That night I lay on the bed in the small but clean room. I opened my phone and looked at Helen's number. My finger hovered over it. In my heart, I could no longer think of her as my mother-in-law, but I had to stick to the plan. I took a deep breath and typed a message, my tone so submissive it felt alien to me. Asterisk, Helen, I'm okay. I'm going to a quiet place to take care of myself. I won't be a burden anymore. Asterisk, I sent the message and turned off the screen. I placed my hand on my belly, and I felt a small flutter in response. I whispered so quietly only I could hear, "Don't worry, little one. I'm not looking for anyone to take care of me anymore. But I will make damn sure no one ever hurts you." The night in Brenda's apartment was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fan and the drip of a faucet down the hall. But my mind was anything but quiet. Lying on my side, my hand on my belly, I stared into the darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Helen's face screaming, "Get out," the envelope of cash hitting the floor, and the black iron gate slamming shut. Around 10 p.m., Brenda knocked on my door and handed me a bowl of warm soup. "Here, honey. A pregnant woman can't go hungry. You need your strength, especially a mother." I took the bowl, mumbled a thank you, and forced a smile. The warm steam was comforting, but after a few spoonfuls, my heart started to pound again. It was a reminder that my fight was far from over. I took out Ethan's old phone and opened the house folder again. Daniel had backed up some of the files, but I needed to hear them myself to understand just how close to the edge I was. I scrolled to one of the last files, one named only with a string of numbers. The first sound was the times-click times of a lighter, followed by the hoarse, cold voice of a man I didn't know. "Don't you worry. One of our trucks has a brake failure. On that mountain road crosses the center line, a little nudge of the steering wheel, and it's over. The police will rule it an accident." My body went rigid. The spoon in my hand froze mid-air. A moment later, Helen's voice. It wasn't loud or sharp, but it was chillingly cold. "Good. Make it look clean. Leave no trace." The man chuckled. "Easy work. Just make sure the payment is in the account on the agreed-upon date. After it's done, we never had this conversation." I dropped the spoon. It clattered on the floor. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the opposite wall, as if it could hear the screaming in my heart. This wasn't a simple threat. This was the calm, casual voice of someone ordering a murder like they were ordering a cup of coffee. I ripped the earbuds out, my stomach churning. My mind raced to the old proverb, "The wicked will be punished." But how? How could someone sip tea and calmly discuss killing another human being? I immediately called Daniel, my voice shaking so badly I had to bite my lip to form words. "Daniel, I just heard it. This isn't a setup. Someone hired a truck driver." "Helen," she said, "make it look clean." There was a long silence on the other end, then a deep sigh. "Evelyn, calm down. Lower your voice. Are you in the apartment?" "Yes." "Lock the door. Don't go outside for any reason." "I'm on my way. I'm going to take a roundabout route." I hung up, locked the door, and drew the curtains, peering through a tiny gap. The street outside looked normal, but now every shadow seemed menacing. When Daniel arrived, he knocked 3 times and said the code phrase we had agreed on. "Brenda sent me with some milk." I let him in. He saw my pale face and frowned. "You really heard it. Did you save the file?" I handed him the phone and pointed to the recording. He listened and his face darkened. He muttered a curse, then looked at me and quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I shook my head, my voice hoarse. "Don't apologize. Just tell me what we do now." He sat down, running his hands over his face like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. He spoke slowly, but with a new sense of urgency. "First, this is powerful evidence, but we can't use it to blackmail her ourselves. That's too dangerous. Second, we have to report this to the police properly and get you under protection." I swallowed hard. "I'm scared. What if they find out I have this before the police can do anything?" "They'll come after me." He nodded. "I know. That's my fear too, which is why we can't just walk into any precinct. We need to find someone with authority, someone who can handle this discreetly." I looked at him. "Do you know someone like that?" He hesitated, then said, "There's a Detective Russo. He handled a case at one of our old sites, something about stolen materials. I met him once. He's a sharp, no-nonsense guy." Detective. The word sent a tremor of fear through me, but also a flicker of hope. It meant there was another path besides just enduring. But why would he meet with me, I asked, feeling so small. Daniel looked me straight in the eye. Because you are the victim's wife. You are the one holding the evidence, and you are a mother trying to protect her unborn child. That is more than enough. I was silent. I remembered what Brenda had said. You need your strength. Right now, my greatest strength was the title of mother, and my only weapon was a clear head. Daniel continued. That feeling of being watched. They might have been watching you for a long time. From now on, you can't leave any digital footprint. Don't use your old number. Keep your own phone turned off completely. If we need to communicate, we use a burner. I looked at my own phone. It suddenly felt like a tracking device. How could she do this, I whispered. Daniel gave a sad smile. Greed. It blinds people. And I think she has help. That man's voice on the recording, he didn't sound like a regular loan shark. He sounded like a professional. My blood ran cold. This was bigger than a family dispute. This was something dark and violent. I sat on the edge of the bed, stroking my belly. The baby was quiet, but I knew that the slightest misstep could shatter that peace. As if I were a different person, I said slowly, I'll cooperate, Daniel. But you have to promise me one thing. You have to promise me my baby will not be harmed in any of this. He nodded fiercely. I promise. He got a pen and paper and started making a list, back up the audio files to a separate USB drive, screenshot key text messages, making sure the time and date were visible, list the names of everyone involved. He made me memorize the apartment address and room number so I could report it quickly if anything happened. While Daniel was writing, Brenda must have overheard our hushed, urgent tones. Without asking too many questions, she poked her head in the door. You two eaten anything, don't starve yourselves. It's a sin for a pregnant woman to go hungry. I looked at her, my throat tight. A total stranger was treating the term pregnant woman with a reverence my own family had denied me. Yes, Brenda. We ate. She gave me a long, knowing look and said quietly, You walk a dark road at night, you're bound to meet ghosts. But if you ain't done nothing wrong, you got nothing to be scared of. You just take care of that baby, honey. The rest of this mess, you take it one step at a time. Her advice to go one step at a time wasn't about avoidance. It was the wisdom of someone who knew how to navigate life's dangers without getting hurt. That night after Daniel left, I didn't sleep. I replayed the recording one more time just to be sure. Make it look clean. Each word was like a needle in my brain. I suddenly realized that Helen's talk about bad rumors and being the master of the house weren't just empty threats. They were the declarations of someone prepared to eliminate any obstacle, including people. I turned off the phone, held my belly, and took a deep breath. I no longer expected anyone to care for me. All I had left was my child and the long, hard road ahead. I wiped my face and sat up straight. I whispered to myself so quietly but so clearly times Evelyn, you can be afraid, but you cannot be a coward. You will not let them drag you and your baby into the same pit they dug for your father. Asterisk. The next morning, Brenda knocked on my door early. She handed me a container of oatmeal with berries and a glass of warm milk. Eat up, honey, she said in her gruff but kind way. Skipping breakfast when you're pregnant is a crime against that baby. Don't you be starving yourself worrying about things. I took the food and thanked her. The warm, sweet smell helped to calm my nausea. As I ate, I looked at the old canvas bag where I'd hidden Ethan's phone. My heart felt as heavy as a stone. Daniel had arranged to meet me at the end of the block at 7 a.m. He had given me strict instructions, pack light, just my ID, a few comfortable outfits, my prenatal vitamins, and most importantly, the evidence. He also told me to dress plainly, wear a baseball cap and a face mask. Look like you're going on a quiet retreat, he'd said. If you look like you're running away, you'll attract more attention. A bitter smile touched my lips. I wasn't trying to run away. I was trying to live. But now, even living required an act. I sent one last message to Helen, maintaining my submissive facade. Asterisk, Helen, I'm going away for a few days to a retreat to pray for Ethan and the baby. Asterisk. I didn't wait for a reply before turning off my old phone. Every time her name appeared on the screen, the words "make it look clean" echoed in my ears, making my heart seize. I left the apartment with a small rolling suitcase. Brenda was leaning against her doorway watching me. You take care of yourself on your trip, you hear, and you call me if you need anything. I'm not anybody important, but I won't leave you high and dry. I nodded, my eyes stinging. I will, Brenda. I'll never forget your kindness, I managed to say, bowing my head deeply to a stranger's generosity. Daniel was already waiting at the corner, dressed in a baseball cap and a light jacket, his eyes scanning the street. He saw me and gave a curt nod. Let's go. We took a cab to the bus terminal. Daniel insisted I sit on the inside away from the window and kept asking if I was feeling dizzy. I just sat there, my hand on my belly, repeating the doctor's words in my head. Breathe evenly. Eat small amounts. Stay calm. The early morning terminal was a chaotic mix of people with luggage and loud announcements. I stuck close to Daniel, not daring to look anyone in the face for too long. It was a strange feeling. I hadn't done anything wrong yet. I felt like a criminal. Daniel bought tickets for a bus heading upstate toward the mountainous region where Ethan's company had the construction site. He said quietly, I remember Ethan once talking about a secluded retreat center deep in the mountains. He said it was a good place to go when you felt cornered. If he's alive and hiding, I bet he'd go somewhere like that. I nodded. I vaguely remembered him mentioning a place like that with winding roads known only to a few. Back then, I had paid it no mind. Now those forgotten words were a lifeline. The bus left around 9 a.m. I sat by the window watching the city recede. The skyscrapers gave way to smaller houses, then to fields and farms, and finally to the endless ribbon of the highway. Daniel handed me a carton of milk and some crackers. Eat a little at a time. An empty stomach makes motion sickness worse. I did as he said, terrified of getting sick. Every jolt of the bus made me clutch my belly and close my eyes. My mind was a battlefield, replaying the image of Ethan pressing his ear to my stomach against the sound of Helen's voice ordering a clean disposal. One was life, the other, death, and they were tearing me apart. The bus stopped at a rest area. Daniel made me get out and walk around to stretch my legs. In the restroom mirror, I saw my reflection. Pale face, dark circles under my eyes, colorless lips. I told myself, times, Evelyn, you can't be weak. If you're weak, you lose. Asterisk. When I came out, I saw a man standing near the vending machines. Black baseball cap holding a phone. He wasn't looking directly at me, but his posture was identical to the man I'd seen watching me when I left Helen's house for the clinic. My heart dropped. I grabbed Daniel's arm and whispered, Daniel, that man over there. I think he's the one who followed me before. Daniel didn't turn around abruptly. He glanced sideways, then guided me past him, his voice casual. Don't stare. Just act normal, and let's get back on the bus. I did as he said, walking quickly back to my seat. Through the window, I saw the man was still there, but next to him was a motorcycle with an out-of-state plate. I couldn't be sure if he had followed us, but the feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. The bus started again, and the road began to climb. The constant curves made me dizzy. Daniel asked the driver if I could move to a seat with less motion. I leaned my head against the seat, listening to the engines groan. And I couldn't help but think of mountain roads and a truck with its steering wheel turned. The thought alone was terrifying. Late that afternoon, we arrived in a small mountain town. Daniel found a modest but clean motel. He chose a room at the far end of the hallway, not on the ground floor, but one with a side window that looked out onto an escape route. His paranoia made me realize that this was my life now, the life of a fugitive. Just as we put our bags down, my phone rang. An unknown number, but the caller ID displayed a name, Dr. Sterling. My hand froze. I hadn't saved his number, but the call history from when he had called me at the hospital was still there. I hesitated, but then thinking that avoiding him might be more dangerous, I answered. Hello, Evelyn Reed, doctor? Sterling's voice was just as low and warm as I remembered. Yes, doctor. I was just calling to see how you were doing. Is the baby all right? You shouldn't be traveling around. This is a delicate time for you. I swallowed hard and glanced at Daniel. He signaled for me to keep it short. Yes, I'm fine. I'm just resting. Dr. Sterling continued, his voice so gentle it would have sounded like genuine concern to anyone else. Remember what I told you. Don't trust strangers you meet on the road. If anything happens, you call me. I'm a doctor. I won't hurt you. I won't hurt you. That one phrase suddenly chilled me to the bone. Truly good people don't need to announce that they're good. I tried to keep my voice steady. Yes, doctor. Thank you. He gave a few more instructions about eating and resting, then hung up. I stared at the dark screen, my throat tight. Daniel immediately asked, "What did he say?" I told him. Daniel frowned. From now on, don't answer that number. We don't know whose side he's on. I nodded, but his low, warm voice echoed in my head. He didn't feel like a random pawn. He felt like a key player in this story. That evening, we ate at a local diner to regain our strength. The simple meal of baked fish and steamed vegetables helped settle my stomach. Outside, I could hear a group of men talking about construction sites, the price of materials, and how the trucks had to time their runs perfectly on the mountain roads. I gripped my fork, their ordinary words sounding to me like shadows of death. Back at the motel, Daniel checked the locks on the door and window and handed me a heating pad and my vitamins. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we need to ask around and find the way to that retreat center. I lay under the covers, but I couldn't close my eyes. I listened to the sounds of the night, the distant hum of traffic, a dog barking, the mountain wind whistling through the cracks in the window. Lying there in the quiet, I thought of the proverb, after the storm comes the calm. I hadn't come that far yet, but I had learned so much: the wisdom to survive, the wisdom to protect my child, and the wisdom not to trust the wrong people. I placed a hand on my belly and whispered, "Let's get some sleep, little one. We have a lot more walking to do tomorrow." The yellow light from the street lamp outside cast a long shadow on the wall. Another shadow passed by the window, paused for a brief second, and then moved on. It was probably just someone walking by, but ever since I had been kicked out of Helen's house, I could no longer believe that anything in the world was just a coincidence. In the early morning, the town was still shrouded in mist. When I stirred, I saw Daniel was already standing by the window, watching the street below. He turned when he heard me move and handed me a thermos of warm water. "Drink some of this. It's going to be a long walk up the mountain. You can't go on an empty stomach." I nodded and took small sips. In the motel mirror, my face was still pale, but my eyes looked harder than they had the day before. It was the hardness of someone who was no longer allowed to fall. We hired a local with a jeep to take us to the base of the mountain trail. Daniel asked him to take the back roads, avoiding the main street. The driver, seeing my pregnant belly, made a very practical observation. "Going up to the retreat to pray, huh? Take it slow on that mountain. The trail's no joke." The mountain. The word made me hold my breath for a second. I placed a hand on my belly and took a deep breath, telling myself I wasn't walking toward fear, but toward life. When we got to the trailhead, the path narrowed. On one side was a steep cliff, on the other, a deep ravine. The mountain air was cool and smelled of damp leaves and earth. As I walked, I could hear my own heart beating, not from exhaustion, but from sheer tension. Daniel walked right beside me, steadying my arm whenever the path was slippery. "Don't rush. When you're pregnant, slow and steady is the only way." "Yes," I answered quietly. I felt like I was walking through a thick fog, clinging to those words, slow and steady, to keep from falling. The gate of the retreat center appeared after a sharp bend in the trail. It wasn't large, but it was old and serene, with a moss-covered stone wall and a traditional sloping roof. A large Bodhi tree cast a wide shadow over the entrance. I could hear the faint melodic sound of a bell, like a gentle knock on the door of my heart. The moment I stepped through the gate, I felt a strange lightness in my legs. This was a place that instinctively made you lower your voice. A few people were lighting incense in the courtyard. Daniel led me straight to the main office. A young man in simple robes opened the door, glanced at me, and bowed his head slightly. "Peace be with you." "Who have you come to see?" I clasped my hands together. "We've come to pray for my husband and our unborn child. And I was hoping to ask if an acquaintance of ours might have visited here recently." The young man led us to the director, an elderly man in his 70s with a thin face but sharp, clear eyes. He sat with perfect posture and spoke in a low voice. "Those who come to this place should speak what is in their hearts. This is a place for people to lay down their burdens." His words made my throat tighten. I tried to stay composed and explained briefly that my husband had once spoken of this retreat. I said I wanted to light some incense for him and ask if a man named Ethan Cole might be staying here. The director looked at me for a long time, then answered curtly, "There is no one by that name here." I was taken aback. Daniel stepped forward and said respectfully, "Sir, he's a tall man with a scar on his hand. Perhaps you might remember him." The director shook his head, his voice unchanged. "I do not remember every person who comes and goes. And even if I did, I could not tell you. I could not tell you." Those words sent a chill through me. A man of peace might not lie, but he could choose not to tell the truth. I glanced around the room. A door on the west side was slightly ajar, a curtain fluttering in the breeze. My heart began to beat faster. I bowed my head. "I understand, sir. I am just his wife. I don't want to cause any trouble in my condition. I just need to know if he's alive." The director's gaze fell to my belly, and his expression softened slightly. He sighed. You must be strong. Do not try to force open a door that is not yet ready to be opened. His words felt like a riddle, and I was filled with a mix of frustration and sorrow. I hadn't come here for philosophy. I had come for my husband, for the truth. But this was a place of peace, and I couldn't show my anger. We asked if we could light some incense. The director nodded and gestured for the young man to bring us some. I knelt before the main altar and clasped my hands, my mind a tangled mess. Amidst the fragrant smoke, I whispered, "Times, Ethan, if you are here, please just give me a sign." Asterisk. As I stood up to leave, I overheard one of the young men whisper to another. The guest in the West Wing said, "If anyone asks for him to, say he's not here." I stopped dead in my tracks. Daniel turned around too. The young man who had spoken realized his mistake. His face went pale, and he stammered, "Oh no, I misspoke." I walked toward him, my voice hoarse. "That guest? Is he tall? With a scar on his hand?" The young man looked from me to the director, his eyes wide with fear. The director tapped a small wooden block beside him. The sharp times toke time sound was a clear warning. The young man immediately bowed his head and fell silent. Daniel pulled me back, whispering, "Evelyn, don't push him. Maybe the director is hiding him for his own safety." I nodded, but my eyes were fixed on that door to the west. Hope was burning inside me like a hot coal. I remembered a song my mother used to sing. Even if the sky falls, there's always a way out. I had been pushed to the edge of a cliff. Surely the heavens had left me one small foothold. I asked the director for permission to walk in the garden behind the building. He nodded, adding, "Do not go alone." Daniel and I walked down a stone corridor. The air grew cooler as we approached the West Wing. My footsteps and my heartbeat seemed to be racing each other. Just as we neared a dark wooden door, a voice came from behind us as light as the wind, but it made me freeze in place. It was low and familiar. "Evelyn Reed, you've come a very long way." I turned. Dr. Sterling was standing at the end of the corridor. He was wearing a gray jacket and holding a string of prayer beads, as if he were just another visitor. His smile was still kind, but his eyes were not. They were cold, clinical, and not at all surprised to see me here. I instinctively took a step back. "Doctor, how are you here?" He let out a small chuckle. "I told you not to wander around. The mountains are high, the roads are lonely. If something were to happen, who would come to save you?" Daniel immediately stepped in front of me, his voice a low growl. "You followed us." Dr. Sterling tilted his head as if he'd heard something absurd. "Followed you, no. I simply arrived when I was needed." A cold feeling washed over me. I looked at the prayer beads in his hand. They suddenly looked like a prop. He took another step closer, his voice still low, but each word was sharp. "Daniel, did you really think bringing her here was a smart move? A retreat is a place where people hide, but it's also a place where they are found." Daniel clenched his fists, the knuckles cracking. I grabbed his sleeve and whispered, "Daniel, don't." "Doctor." Sterling was no longer hiding his amusement. "Evelyn, it would be best for everyone if you cooperate. I understand you want to protect your child, but you've chosen the wrong sanctuary." My voice trembled, but I asked, "Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the main hall, toward the director, who was now standing there, his face grim. Dr. Sterling's lips curled into a slight smile. "I am the man who makes sure everything gets taken care of. Cleanly." In that instant, several men appeared from both ends of the corridor. They had rough faces and restless eyes, not the look of peaceful retreat-goers. One blocked the way back, and another stood right behind us. Daniel took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Evelyn, get against the wall. Don't let them grab you." I held my belly and pressed my back against the cold stone. A proverb flashed in my mind. "Meet a saint, and you wear a robe. Meet a demon, and you wear paper." I thought I had found a sanctuary, but I had walked straight into a den of a devil wearing a benevolent mask. Dr. Sterling pulled a small object from his pocket. I didn't have to see it clearly to know from the glint of metal that it was a syringe. He spoke slowly as if lecturing a class. "Evelyn, don't make this difficult for me. I don't like noise. Just a little nap and everything will be quiet." I gasped. Daniel took a step forward and yelled, "You bastard!" And immediately 2 of the men rushed him, overpowering him. The sounds of a struggle, shuffling feet, tearing fabric, guttural groans filled the sacred silence of the corridor. I wanted to scream, but my throat was closed. All I could do was hold my belly, bite my lip, until I tasted blood, and fight to stay on my feet. From a distance, the director strode forward, his voice booming with authority. "This is a house of peace. What are you doing, doctor?" Sterling turned, still smiling, but his eyes were like razors. "You should stick to your chanting, old man. Don't meddle in the affairs of the world." The director blocked his path, turning his prayer beads, his voice as low and resonant as a temple bell. "There is no separating this world from the next here. To commit an evil act in this courtyard is to defile all that is sacred." I looked at the old man with a mixture of gratitude and despair. The sanctuary could hold them off for a moment, but I was surrounded. I could see Daniel struggling, pinned by the two men. I heard Dr. Sterling's footsteps approaching. The faint scent of his cologne mixed with the incense, creating a suffocating perfume. I closed my eyes for a second, my hand clutching the old phone in my pocket. It was my evidence, my last lifeline. I could not fall here. Not because I was brave, but because my child had not even been born yet. I couldn't look at the syringe anymore. The glint of the needle was enough to freeze me to the spot. I pressed my back harder against the stone wall, my hands shielding my belly, each breath a thin, fragile thread. "Doctor." Sterling took another step closer, his voice still deceptively gentle. Now, Evelyn. Be good. I don't want to have to hurt you." The words were a chilling paradox. The people who say they don't want to hurt you are usually the ones who hurt you the most. Daniel, still struggling against his captors, his face red and veins bulging in his neck, managed to yell, "Evelyn, run, run, where?" There was a needle in front of me, a wall behind me, and the path down was blocked. I glanced toward the director. He stood in the middle of the corridor, his eyes blazing, his voice like thunder. "Stop this at once. There are witnesses here, and the heavens are watching. You are accumulating a heavy karma." Dr. Sterling scoffed. "Karma? You're talking to me about karma. I make my living off of other people's fears." With that, he nodded, and one of the men lunged for me, his rough hand grabbing my wrist. I reacted on pure instinct. A jolt of pain shot through my abdomen, and the fear exploded. But something else, something stronger, exploded with it, the primal need to protect my child. Without thinking, I ducked my head and bit down hard on the back of the man's hand. He yelled in pain and surprise, his grip loosening for a split second. In that instant, I twisted away and ran, putting every ounce of strength I had into moving toward the main hall. I couldn't run fast, but I ran like I was being chased by fire, one hand on my belly, desperately trying not to slip on the smooth stone floor. "Get her, doctor!" Sterling hissed, his voice, low but urgent, trying not to cause a scene. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. My lungs burned, my throat was raw. Ahead of me was the open courtyard. The few people who had been lighting incense turned their faces shocked. As I reached the steps of the main hall, the director moved with surprising speed, standing at the top of the stairs, his arms outstretched like a gate. "Halt," his voice boomed. "If you wish to harm this pregnant woman, you will have to go through me first." The men hesitated for a moment. And in that moment, I fumbled in my pocket and pulled out the old phone. My hands were shaking, but my mind was strangely clear. I remembered Daniel's words, times, protect the evidence and use it when you have to. Asterisk, I opened the house folder and selected the audio file with Dr. Sterling's voice. I didn't use the earbuds this time. I turned the speaker to full volume so the entire courtyard could hear. After a burst of static, the hoarse voice of the hired man filled the air. Asterisk, one of our trucks has a brake failure. On that mountain road crosses the center line. A little nudge of the steering wheel, and it's over. Asterisk. The people in the courtyard froze. One woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I stared directly at Dr. Sterling. For a split second, his mask slipped. His face changed. I knew I had hit his greatest fear exposure. As he lunged for the phone, the director slammed his wooden block on the stone steps. The sharp times, crack times echoed through the courtyard. "Insolence!" he roared. But these men didn't fear a higher power. One of them charged forward recklessly. The director didn't strike him, but he held his ground, his old body as firm as the mountain itself. The man stopped, suddenly aware of the crowd that was now gathering, some with their phones out recording. Dr. Sterling's eyes narrowed. "Turn that off," he commanded in a low voice. I took a step back, clutching the phone to my chest as the recording continued to play. My voice was hoarse. "You wanted to handle this cleanly, right? Let's handle it cleanly right here in front of everyone." He gritted his teeth, muttered a curse, and then, in a desperate move, raised the syringe and ran toward me. My heart leaped into my throat. At that exact moment, a sharp, piercing whistle cut through the sacred quiet. Asterisk. Tweet. Tweet. Times. A police whistle. I whipped my head around. 2 SUVs and a van had screeched to a halt at the gate, and uniformed officers were pouring out. A commanding voice yelled, "NYPD, nobody move." The men scattered like rats. One tried to run toward the back. Another tried to scale the wall. "Doctor." Sterling froze for a second, then immediately tried to retreat, the color drained from his face. He tried to act casual, but his eyes were darting around in panic. An officer pointed directly at them. "Apprehend them." 2 officers tackled the nearest man. Dr. Sterling looked for an escape, but the director was already blocking the entrance to the corridor. The old man looked at him, not with anger, but with a deep, weary sigh. The path of wickedness is always a short one. "Doctor." Sterling snarled and tried to push past him, but an officer was already on him, twisting his arm behind his back. The syringe clattered to the stone floor, its metallic glint extinguished. I stood there frozen until my legs gave out, and I sank onto the steps. The director came over and put a hand on my shoulder, his voice low. "Breathe slowly, child. The shock is not good for the baby." I tried to breathe, but I couldn't stop the tears. This time, they weren't tears of sorrow, but of pure, unadulterated relief, like I had just been pulled from the depths of hell. Daniel was released, his shirt torn and a bruise already forming on his cheek. He rushed to my side, kneeling. "Evelyn, are you okay? The baby is the baby, okay?" I couldn't speak, just nodded over and over, gripping his hand as if letting go would send me back into the nightmare. A man in plain clothes approached. He had a solid build, sharp eyes, and a clear, authoritative voice. "I'm Detective Russo." "Which one of you is Evelyn Reed?" I looked up. Daniel said quickly, "That's him. The one I told you about." "Evelyn, stay calm." I managed to pull myself together and answered, my voice trembling, "I'm Evelyn Reed." Detective Russo looked at me, then at the phone, still clutched in my hand. He spoke in a short, confident tone. "We heard that recording. I need you to hand over that device and tell me how you obtained it." With a shaking hand, I gave him the phone. There was nothing left to hide. I gave him the simple, brutal truth. It belonged to my husband, Ethan Cole. It has recordings related to the Mountain Road accident. The woman's voice on the recording is my mother-in-law. Detective Russo didn't react with shock. He just nodded as if he were already fitting the pieces together. He gave an order to one of his officers. "Secure the evidence. Get statements from the director and the other witnesses here." Then he turned back to me, his voice lower, now the tone of a seasoned professional taking charge. "Ma'am, you and the baby will be taken to a hospital immediately to be checked out. From this point on, do not go anywhere without our knowledge. We will be providing a protective detail." Protective detail. At those words, the tension finally broke and my whole body began to shake. It felt like for the first time someone was saying the right thing. But a new fear quickly followed. I grabbed the detective's arm, my voice urgent. "My mother-in-law, if she finds out, I'm scared of what she'll do." Detective Russo looked me straight in the eye. "Rest assured, now that you have filed a report and submitted evidence, any threat against you will result in additional severe charges. Your job is to cooperate and stay safe." I nodded, tears dripping onto the back of my hand. In that moment, I realized a profound truth. People can use love and family to wound you, but you can use the law to stand back up. A local ambulance arrived. Before getting in, I looked back at the courtyard. The incense still smelled sweet, and the evening bell was ringing softly. The director stood on the steps, his hands pressed together, and said quietly, "You have passed the great trial. Now keep your heart light and do not let vengeance blind you." I bowed my head. "Yes, sir. I'll remember that." Daniel rode with me in the ambulance. He sat quietly, reminding me to sip water and breathe. I looked out the window as the mountains grew smaller in the distance. Only one thought was clear in my mind. Times they wanted to handle everything cleanly. But this time, it wouldn't be my baby and me who were handled. Asterisk. We arrived at a small regional hospital. As dusk was settling, a doctor checked my blood pressure and let me hear the baby's heartbeat, confirming that the fetus was miraculously unharmed. I lay on the bed, my hand on my belly, terrified that if I let go, everything would fall apart again. Daniel waited outside, his face bruised, his eyes burning with a quiet rage. A young nurse brought me a glass of juice. "Drink this," she said softly. "A pregnant woman's blood sugar can drop in an instant." I sipped it slowly. My throat was still raw, not just from fear but from the chilling realization that if that police whistle hadn't blown my baby, and I would have vanished without a trace right in front of a sacred altar. About 30 minutes later, Detective Russo came in, accompanied by a female officer. He skipped the pleasantries and got straight to the point. "Miss Reed, are you feeling well enough to give a statement?" I nodded. "Yes, I can do it." He sat in a chair a respectful distance away. "Start from the beginning. Dates, times, who said what, who did what. Just the facts. No need to embellish." I took a deep breath and began. I told him everything from Ethan leaving for his trip in early July, to the pre-dawn phone call, the sham funeral at the house, Helen taking the keys, Gus obsessing over paperwork. My voice broke when I described the day she threw the envelope of cash at me and told me to get an abortion. I recounted the man who followed me to the clinic, the anonymous warning text meeting Daniel, and the old phone with the house folder. When I mentioned hearing Helen's voice say, "Make it look clean," I had to stop to catch my breath. The female officer handed me a tissue. Detective Russo waited patiently, his gaze growing sharper with every detail. "Are you certain the female voice on the recording is your mother-in-law, Helen Cole?" "Yes," I said with absolute conviction. "I lived with her. I heard that voice every single day. I could never mistake it." "And the man?" "Dr. Sterling. You're sure you met him at the clinic?" I looked him in the eye. "Yes." He said he was a doctor. It wasn't until today that I realized he wasn't there to save me. He was there to lead me into a trap. Russo jotted down some notes. "Do you have any other evidence besides your husband's phone?" "Daniel has a backup of the files on a USB drive." I said, "And I have the number that sent me the warning text." I didn't exaggerate. I was afraid saying too much would make it sound like a lie. The detective nodded, his voice calm. "We'll extract the data, run a voice analysis, trace the numbers, and check the travel logs. Your job right now is to stay safe and cooperate." Stay safe. Hearing those words, I realized my shoulders were trembling. I just hoped that, like the old saying goes, if you plant beans, you get beans. I was hoping to finally find some solid ground to stand on. After giving my statement, the police moved me to a secure room in a guest house, with an officer posted outside my door. Daniel was waiting in the hallway. He handed me a bag with a container of chicken soup and a banana. His voice was hoarse. "Evelyn, eat. Surviving is winning. You remember that." I looked at him. I wanted to smile, but I couldn't. "You get that bruise," looked at Daniel. "And get some rest." He just nodded and turned away quickly as if he didn't want me to see the moisture in his eyes. That night, I actually slept for a few hours. But I was woken before dawn by a soft knock. It was the female officer. "Miss Reed, Detective Russo would like to see you." I pulled on a sweater and went out. The detective was standing in the hall holding a phone. His expression was serious, but his eyes were thoughtful, not cold. "I need you to come with us to the main county hospital." My heart leaped. "What's happened?" He spoke each word clearly. "There's a male patient at the hospital. He was brought in about 2 weeks ago, after a fall down a ravine. He has temporary amnesia, and he has a scar on his left hand. The doctors say his physical description and age are a strong match for your husband." I froze. The world went silent except for the frantic thumping of my own heart. I clutched my sweater, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "Are you sure?" He shook his head. "We're not sure. That's why we need you to identify him. But it could be him, or it could not. You need to prepare yourself for either outcome." I just kept nodding. I couldn't let myself feel joy. The fall from joy back to despair would be too great. But my legs were shaking uncontrollably. We drove to the hospital through the misty pre-dawn light. The familiar smell of antiseptic brought back the day I had fainted, but this time I didn't fall. I walked slowly, my hand on my belly, vowing to myself, "Times baby mommy is going to stand tall now." Asterisk. A doctor on duty led us to a room at the end of a corridor, with 2 plainclothes officers standing guard outside. Detective Russo knocked and went in first. I followed, my heart about to burst from my chest. A man was lying in the bed, noticeably thinner than I remembered. His hair was cut short, and his arm was in a cast. He was looking out the window, but turned his head when he heard us enter. I saw his face, the line of his nose, his jaw, the face I had looked at and touched every day, but it was paler, gaunt, and his eyes were different. They were the eyes of a stranger. I stood there, paralyzed, my lips parted but no sound coming out. "Ethan." The man looked at me, his brow furrowed as if he were trying to search a blank memory. His voice was raspy. "Who are you?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Tears instantly sprang to my eyes. I took a step closer, but he flinched, pulling back with the wariness of someone who doesn't know where they are. Detective Russo said calmly, "It's okay. It's family." I swallowed a sob, fighting the urge to run and throw my arms around him. Instead, I held out my hand, showing him my wedding ring, and said in a trembling but clear voice, "I'm Evelyn. I'm your wife. And in here is your child." He looked down at my belly, then back at my face. His eyes flickered just for a second. He subconsciously touched the scarred wrist on his other hand, then shook his head. I don't remember. All I remember is the sound of brakes and bright headlights." My throat closed up. I wanted to ask who had done this to him, but I knew now was not the time. I just nodded, tears falling freely. "It's okay. You're alive. That's all that matters. If you don't remember, we'll remember together slowly." He stared at me for a long time. The wariness in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a deep confusion. He whispered as if afraid of hurting someone, "I'm sorry. I'm making you cry." A laugh bubbled up through my tears. Even with his memory gone, he was still the same, gentle Ethan. I shook my head. "Don't be sorry. Just rest. I'm right here." Detective Russo nodded at me, giving his permission. He then spoke quietly with the doctor about the patient's condition and the protocol for witness protection. I pulled a chair up to the bedside, keeping a small distance so as not to frighten him. I started talking, telling him small, simple stories. About the kids at my preschool. About how he used to love spicy barbecue. About how he always used to say, "Don't worry, I've got this." I didn't mention his mother, or the recordings. I wanted to anchor him back to this world with warm memories. He didn't remember, but he listened sometimes, closing his eyes as if trying to picture it. As I stood up to get a glass of water, he suddenly asked in a low voice, "Evelyn, is that really your name?" I turned, my heart aching but also warming. "Yes." My husband said he liked it because it sounded gentle and kind. He looked at me again. This time his eyes weren't entirely those of a stranger. It was like a door had been opened, just a tiny crack. I sat back down, my hand on my belly, and breathed. The sounds of the hospital filled the hallway, but inside this room, for the first time since I was thrown out of my home, I had found something solid to hold on to. Ethan was alive. And though he didn't remember me, I had my husband, my baby had a father, and I had the truth, my weapon, to finally stand up and fight. I stayed by Ethan's side until the doctor insisted I get some rest. Detective Russo arranged for me to stay in a room at a nearby guest house, designated for patient families with a police detail. "Evelyn," he said bluntly, "from this moment on, you and your unborn child are material witnesses. Do not contact your in-laws. We will handle them." I nodded. I knew I couldn't afford to be emotional anymore. Emotion had gotten me thrown onto the street. This time, I would fight with reason. The next few days unfolded with a cold clinical precision, the only kind of precision that can save a person's life. On May 18, 2025, the police took my second official statement, cross-referencing it with the data extracted from Ethan's phone. Daniel submitted the backup USB drive. Brenda, my landlady, even gave a statement testifying to my condition when I arrived at her place, and the strange text message I had received. In her frank market stall owner's way, she said, "I don't know who's right or wrong, but I know that pregnant girl showed up at my door white as a sheet. You treat people that bad, the universe notices." The phrase "the universe notices" made my eyes water, but I no longer trusted the universe. I trusted evidence and the law. Dr. Sterling and his men were arrested shortly after the incident at the retreat. At first, Sterling denied everything, claiming he was only trying to take my phone. But the voice analysis, the location tracking the syringe, and the testimony of the witnesses at the retreat quickly broke down his lies. Detective Russo reportedly told him one thing: a white coat doesn't hide a black heart. My mother-in-law Helen and Uncle Gus were brought in for questioning after a search of their house, uncovered financial documents detailing suspicious money transfers. I didn't see them being arrested, but just the thought of it made my heart grow cold. I had once called her my family had endured humiliation, thinking that if I was patient, peace would follow. But when you are too patient, people start to think you can't feel pain. Life had taught me that while good things might come to good people, sometimes you have to fight your way out of hell to receive them. Ethan remained in the hospital for over a month. His memory was a tangled mess with fragments returning one day only to vanish the next. I never pushed him. I just told him stories every single day. About how we first met in late 2023. About how he came to visit me in Iowa and declared that the food at a small-town diner was better than any fancy restaurant in New York. About our wedding day in May 2025, how his hands shook when he saw me in my wedding dress. I told these stories like a mother reading a fairy tale to a child, because I knew that sometimes memory has to be coaxed back with peace, not force. One night in mid-November, Ethan woke up suddenly, clutching his head, his face pale. He was gasping, stammering. Mountain road. Headlights. The horn. A truck. It pushed me. I held him, trying to calm him down. Detective Russo, who was on duty outside, came in. Ethan's account was fragmented, but it was enough to piece together the picture. He said that before he drove up the mountain, he had received a text warning him not to go. He had been suspicious, but had dismissed it, thinking it was a prank. Then the truck had crossed the center line. He had swerved to avoid it, sending his own car tumbling down the ravine. He had survived the crash but was trapped and had only managed to crawl out before passing out. He was found not by his company but by a passing hiker. He finished his story, then looked at me, a painful memory surfacing. "Evelyn. Mom. Did Mom take care of you?" My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him the truth, but I couldn't bring another blade down on him just as he was starting to heal. I took his hand and said something that was both true and protective. We took care of ourselves. Me and the baby. We survived. The rest. The law will answer for that. On May 5th, 2026, the first trial began. I walked into the courtroom with my large, pregnant belly. My hands were shaking, but I forced my back to be straight. Dr. Sterling sat in the defendant's box. He glanced at me once, his eyes just as cold as they had been in the retreat corridor. Behind him sat Helen. Her face was bare of makeup, her hair pulled back, her eyes hollow. Uncle Gus sat with his head bowed, all his former bluster gone. When the court played the recording, and the sound of the man's voice saying, a little nudge of the steering wheel filled the room. A hush fell over the courtroom. I heard Helen's voice say, "Make it look clean," and my heart felt like it was being torn apart again. But this time, I didn't crumble. I put my hand on my belly and promised times, my child will see their mother standing tall. Asterisk, Ethan testified as the primary victim. He was still thin, but his eyes were clear. When the prosecutor asked him a question, he answered with a clarity that surprised even me. I am not asking for forgiveness for anyone. I am only asking that you protect my wife and my child. Because they tried to kill all three of us. At those words, I finally broke down and cried. Tears of vindication, because my pain had finally been given a name. And tears of gratitude, because my husband was finally completely on my side. The verdict was severe. Dr. Sterling and his accomplices were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and reckless endangerment. Helen and Gus were also convicted for their part in the conspiracy, as well as fraud. The specific sentences don't matter. What I remember is the sound of the judge's gavel times, bang, bang, bang times, and the feeling of a great stone being lifted from my chest. As I left the courtroom, I didn't look back. I didn't shout. I had only one thought. Evil people choose their own path. They sowed the wind, and now they were reaping the whirlwind. In early February of 2026, my labor began. The pain came suddenly in the middle of the night, and it felt like life's final ironic joke. After everything I had been through, the thing that made me cry the most was the pain of childbirth. Ethan was holding my hand, his eyes red. "Hang in there, honey. I'm here. I remember everything now. All of it. Through the pain, I laughed through my tears. Good. Because if you lose your memory again, I'm going to be very angry." He nodded frantically, his eyes a mixture of regret and overwhelming love. Our son was born healthy, his cry thin but clear, as if announcing that his mother had won. Ethan held him his hands, shaking just as they had when I had shown him the pregnancy test. He managed to choke out one sentence. "I am so sorry I left you and your mom alone." I looked at my two boys. Ethan's eyes were now filled with me. I suddenly felt that those months of being on the street, of being trapped and terrified, were no longer a shameful scar. They were the price I had paid to learn how to stand. We left New York City after that. The grand house and the fortune that had fueled so much greed were gone. Ethan found a job at a smaller engineering firm, slowly rebuilding his life. I went back to teaching kindergarten. The sound of children's laughter, the smell of milk and chalk, it was a simple, ordinary life, more precious than gold. The lesson I learned was this: you cannot blindly trust someone, even if they share your name, and you cannot let your patience become an excuse for others to trample you. When you must, you have to be cold, you have to be smart, and you have to hold on to the law and hold on to yourself. If today's story has given you something to think about, please give it a like to support our channel. If you have any thoughts or experiences you'd like to share, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you to all our viewers for listening to the end. I wish you all health and peace. I'll be back with another story soon.